going to be sped up.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good morning. Yes, welcome to Tuesday. Never a dull day, particularly today. Do you know what? It's a very simple question. Do you believe the Prime Minister? Yesterday, in a lengthy and convoluted explanation, we finally got the headline, one we could have already written. I knew nothing. Yep, I'm the leader of the country, the supreme boss of everything, but I knew nothing, despite appointing the most controversial man in modern-day politics to one of the biggest political appointments on the planet, a man with form and a man we already knew was a bit of a wrong-un. I lacked any level of curiosity about his security vetting. I knew the vetting was going on. I didn't ask for an update. I didn't even ask when it was completed. I didn't ask how it went. Not a cursory, hey, Ollie, have the men in black found any landmines? Nothing. Do you believe Keir Starmer? We'll open the lines on that one now. Elsewhere, but fully connected, the former head of the Foreign Office, Ollie Robbins, will take the chair today at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. This could be bombshell evidence. Will he contradict Keir Starmer? Is he about to tip a huge bucket of dung onto Downing Street? We cross live to that evidence later. And in other news, Nigel Farage faces questions over his plans to offer migrants £1,000 each to leave Britain. It's as simple as that. Can it work? Will it work? Your thoughts on that? And the green entrepreneur Dale Vince, one of Labour's biggest donors, is urging Ed Miliband to ditch heat pumps. Yeah, saying they don't work and give the money to the armed forces to fill the defence black hole. Who would have thought it? Mr. Vince joins us later. And a shopping centre is boasting about having Britain's only chip vending machine. Serious? Captain Chips, God, in Wrexham Shopping Centre offers the dish for £2.99. Press A3 for a large portion. Our lines are open, 0344 499 1000. You can message on 87222. You can voice note us on the previous number as well. We are delighted that Matt Vickers, MP, Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party, is back with us. Hello, Matt.
Morning.
Chips out of a vending machine.
Full on. $2.99. No, that sounds quite expensive, doesn't it? $2.99.
I think chips are... They are... You know what they've done with chips? They just give you loads of them now in quite a lot of... You know, you used to be like, oh, they give really bad portions. The one I go to could feed... It's almost biblical. You buy a bag of chips for the whole family. You just buy one bag, seriously.
Do you go with the scraps, though? Do you get the scraps?
I like the scraps, but they don't seem to be scrap-based as much as they used to.
They're not as scrappy as they once were.
They were once really scrappy, and now they're not scrappy. But would you want chips out of a vending machine?
I'd give it a whirl. Is this like a self-heating vending machine, or are you getting cold
Well, you'd
chips?
hope there's a heater in it,
It's a bit bizarre. I've never seen a heated vending machine, really.
Well, is it Japan where you can buy all sorts from vending machines? From underwear to, you know, to cupcakes to... Exactly.
Just conveniently buy underwear.
Exactly. Who's walking through a shopping centre and suddenly goes, oh, I forgot to put my pants on. Where's the vending machine? But
I said bring on the chip vending machines. I think it seems like a good idea, but nobody tells Starmer because he'll ban it, I'm sure.
Well, you'd like to think they're being cooked kind of there and then someone's just popping them in and you're dispensing them.
Microchips. They still do those? You remember you had the soggy box thing?
See, I thought that was, when I was a kid, I thought that was the most incredible invention, microchips. It's just a box and, you know, 60 seconds.
Well, then there was, you had the microchips with the soggy box, and it had like some sort of film thing that reflected the... And then you got those ones that were the fries with a little separator in.
That's
didn't you?
right, you did.
They stayed firm and sharp and crispy.
They know what they're doing, the McCain boys, don't they? They really do. You were there yesterday in the theatre of love, or the theatre of doom, depending on where you're sitting, I suppose. It was interesting. It was lengthy. It was fairly quiet to start with as well.
Well, it's the silence that gets you. You know, when we were in government, well, at all times in politics, if you go on those WhatsApp groups and nobody's speaking, it means there's trouble. There's trouble brewing. These people on those backbenches, these spineless Labour MPs who should have got rid of him long, long ago, who've allowed the government to get into this state, who are allowing this man, despite his lies, despite the absolute carnage he's causing to our economy, these guys who are allowing this man to stay in office had very little to say yesterday. They're silent, but they're certainly not happy bunnies on those backbenches.
It does seem... Well, in fact, let's have a listen to... because Keir Starmer's going to answer the question I was going to put to you here. Let's have a listen to Starmer on the incredulity of what happened.
I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in the Foreign Office saw fit to withhold this information from the most senior ministers in our system in government. That is not how the vast majority of people in this country expect politics, government or accountability to work. And I do not think it's how most public servants think it should work either.
I have to assume he's using the word incredible there as in not credible as opposed to amazing.
Unbelievable. It's too right, it's unbelievable. Yeah. Particularly because he's been telling us for months that it wasn't the case.
Yes.
Misled Parliament. I mean, he did mislead Parliament. He told them 3 times that due diligence, due process had been followed, the boxes were ticked, the processes were complete. It's all above water. There's nothing to be seen here. Yeah. And then he went a step further, didn't he? He said that security vetting had been carried out independently by security services, and that had given Mandelson clearance for the role. That was a lie. He misled Parliament. He said previous MPs who misled Parliament.
He didn't know.
He didn't know. He stood at the dispatch box and told people. He told us he followed it. He told us that he had been given clearance for the role. You shouldn't stand up and say...
Well, he says he was told he got clearance for the role, wasn't he? Starmer's point is that...
Well, he misled Parliament. He stood there, misled the public, misled Parliament and told us that this guy had been given... And what did he say before? He told us that if a PM misleads Parliament, then he should resign.
Who decides whether he misled Parliament?
Well, that's always the problem, isn't it? That is the big... There should be a more decisive process.
Is there a misled Parliament office?
Well, when you
somewhere in the corridors of Westminster.
There is some element.
Hello. Is this the misled Parliament office?
Well,
it's Monty Python again.
At the point where there should be some sort of standards and some sort of standards process put in place. If somebody stands there and lies to Parliament, they should be held to account when they blatantly do such a thing. I don't think anybody out there is buying this. It absolutely stinks. But it stinks from the core. So the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom decided it was a good shout to appoint his chum to the most prestigious and important diplomatic post this country. This isn't just giving him a job to your mate. This is giving him the biggest of jobs, the most sensitive of jobs. And the guy he picked was a guy who'd been sacked twice from government for being tied up in scandal, twice over, well, 3 times now. He appointed him to this job. He's told us all the processes were completed, that he was fit to do the role. It turns out that not only, as everybody knew, is the guy a rotter, but he's got links to one of the biggest, most high-profile, most sick, evil paedophiles ever to walk the earth. And then he's already confirmed. The Prime Minister's already confirmed he knew about this at the time he appointed him.
So he still gave him the job. So regardless of the other vet, the China, the Russian stuff, he knew about the Epstein stuff. And what's interesting here to me, and there's 2 points, but predominantly, so the Foreign Office kept their powder dry on this, apparently. Ollie Robbins, and we are going to cross live to that later, he's going to be in the chair at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Emily Thornberry chairs that. They're going to hold him to account. Not the first time the Foreign Office officials have been in front of that committee. I know Thornberry is very grumpy about this, so she's going to give both barrels on this. Do we get a contradiction from Robbins here? Because I can... Look, if he seems to be saying, Ollie Robbins is saying, it's within my gift, it's within the rules, that I don't have to give this information to Minister. In fact, it's central to this process. I give them a conclusion. The information from the security services is advisory. That's what he's likely to say. So I look at it, and I look at it in the round. I don't just look at one thing and I go, OK, so didn't do well on that bit, did OK on that bit, was brilliant on that bit. In the round, I've decided, as the Permanent Secretary, he should still get the job. And that's it. You don't need any other information. I don't have to give any other information. Now, let's say that is all true. It's a bit weird if that is the system, that one man in this respect has that kind of autonomy and power. Put that to one side, Matt. Wouldn't somebody in Downing Street, though, while all this was going on, have gone, Hello, is that the Foreign Office, by the way? I looked this up. It's 3.5 minutes walk from Downing Street. 1 minute in a car, 30 seconds in a prime ministerial car. So you can get around there pretty lively. Wouldn't somebody in the process, in the time it was going on, go, Ollie, how's it going? How's the vetting going for Peter? And at the end of it, didn't they? Oh, the vetting must be complete now. I looked at the calendar. It's in my cat. It's due now. How did he get? Did he fail anything? Somebody should have asked that question, surely.
It just isn't going to hold water, this. It is not going to hold water. The problem is some of these civil servants are so apolitical, very committed guys who will do anything to avoid getting caught pointing the finger. But yesterday, the Prime Minister stood at that dispatch box and threw Ollie Robbins under every mode of public transport going. He blamed him for everything. The reality is the Prime Minister stood at the dispatch box.
That case he lost at Tottenham Magistrates Court back in 2012. Yeah, that as well was on the list.
He stood at the dispatch box and told us that this guy had been given the go-ahead. He'd had the clearance. You don't stand at a dispatch box and say that unless you ask somebody. You don't say, oh, I didn't know. I mean, Diane Abbott summed it up perfectly yesterday, didn't she? She's not known for being on it at all times.
Praise the mighty Abbott this morning.
Praise the Abbott. She called him out. You can't just keep saying, I didn't know anything. It was somebody else's fault. This is the guy before he was elected, by the way, as Prime Minister, told everybody that he doesn't blame his staff. It's all on him. He doesn't throw his staff under the bus. How many of them has he sacked? Everybody. It's just collateral damage now. Just throw them under the bus, get them out of the way, and But the problem is beyond this. Not only is the guy rotten, not only is he shown he's got terrible judgment, he's now encamped in number 10, and the entire country is going to hell in a handcart because all he is worried about is what he can do to appease his backbenchers, what he can do to keep hold of the keys to number 10. That's all is number one priority. As a result, all the decisions that need to be made in government have gone to the wall. Yesterday, really important bit of local news from my part of the world, Wes Streeting, who's been going to have a meeting with the Mayor of the Tees Valley for months. In fact, I think it's gone on for about 2 years now, about our local hospital. Wes Streeting cancelled the meeting because he had to go and support the Prime Minister.
Seriously?
So our local hospital, the future of my local hospital that's losing 600 members of staff, was put on hold so Wes Streeting could go and do a bit of, rubbing the shoulders of the Prime Minister. I didn't actually see him in there yesterday.
That's weird. It wasn't even there.
But that's the process. All this is going on, and the decisions that need to be made about our country, all of the priorities that should be at the forefront of people's minds in number 10, are all about helping this man survive as Prime Minister.
Let's have a listen then to Diane Abbott in action, taking aim at Keir Starmer.
Visa Anderson has a history, and what this House wants to know is why, knowing Peter Mandelson's history, going back now 30 years, and given what has been known, it's one thing to say, as he insists on saying, nobody told me. Nobody told me anything. Nobody told me. The question is, why didn't the Prime Minister ask?
Yeah, the least curious Prime Minister in history. Again, I come back to that point. Even if he didn't ask, someone around him, there's so many, phrase mandarins, there's so many Cabinet Office, Downing Street, Private Secretary, Assistant to the Prime Minister, Press Secretary, Communications Director. There's so many roles there. And no one thought to trot down to the Foreign Office. You could have even stopped for a Mackie D's on the way. I mean, it's very, very close. You could have stopped and knocked on the door of Ollie Robbins and said, Ollie, just give us the brief.
No one. It's incredible, in fact.
Well, you see, you're backing up the Prime Minister now.
Incredible. In fact, it's just a blatant lie, isn't it? It just doesn't hold water. You can't stand at the dispatch box, tell the country that this guy's passed all his vetting, being cleared when he hasn't, and not ask the question. You wouldn't be saying it unless you'd ask the question or been told. I mean, the other thing with this thing is because it's got sort of tentacles all over, because the stench is so strong, we lose some of the facts in the story because the thing's gone on a while, because he's had to be forced, kicking and screaming, to give over the information. We forget that this is part of a pattern of behaviour, because the Mandelson appointment isn't one of it on alone, is it? We see this Matthew Doyle story.
Yes.
So this is a former Chief of Communications, former communications staffer at number 10, who was appointed to the House of Lords despite being linked to a paedophile. This is now a pattern of behaviour in Number 10. It basically appoints pedo pals to prestigious posts and seems to think it can get away with it. It seems to think it won't be held to account.
It must have been amazing to be there yesterday when you were a lad walking the cobbled streets of Stockton-on-Tees in the 50s, Matt. It would have... In
the 50s?
That took a while.
Back when chips were like 60p.
Yeah, and they didn't come out of a vending machine. It must have been a moment when you look at this and think, well, you know, this is the mother of all parliaments kind of in action. I mean, it was a curious time to be there. We don't really want to see these kind of sessions where the Prime Minister has to say, I didn't lie, I didn't tell you. You know, our system should be better than this. But a great moment to be there, and it was interesting. Let's have a listen to, I mean, you guys did poke fun. That's what you do. You're His Majesty's official opposition. The Tories having a right old pop at no idea Keir. Have a listen to this.
And resign.
A beautiful montage by the Conservative Party. Do people just not like Keir Starmer? Is that what it is? It's like, oh, I'm not going to tell him. Are you going to tell him? No. Can't be bothered to go around there. I might get into a conversation with him.
The thing is, it's the enormity of it. You know, like, can you imagine if you or I lined one of our mates up for a job?
Yeah.
It would be a thing. You know, if you, oh, well, go on, give him the role. He might not be quite up to it, but give him a role.
Yeah.
Actually, this guy was sacked from office twice. He wasn't just sacked from a job. It wasn't the guy who's the cleaner in our office block who got sacked for doing something maybe he shouldn't have done.
Correct.
This is a guy who was sacked from government for being up to his eyes in horrific scandals. It was the most public of public things. He's now gone on, not to get another job, not to get a job in the office, not get a job as a cleaner, not to get a job helping somebody out. He's gone on to be appointed to the most prestigious and important diplomatic post this country has to offer, with all of the salaries that come with it at the public expense, and he's turned out to be a rotter. It's no surprise to me, it's no surprise to you, it's no surprise to anyone at home that Peter Mandelson is rotten and cannot be trusted. We learnt that quite a while ago, yet still our Prime Minister decided to appoint him as ambassador to the US. It stinks.
We will have more from Matt Vickers in a couple of moments' time. 0344 499 1000. You can call or voice note us there. You can leave a message, of course, on 87222. Do you believe, Keir Starmer, when you look at this in the round, that phrase again, do you believe the Prime Minister? Let's get a voice note on all of this from Wayne. Morning, Wayne.
Morning, Ian. Morning, Matt. This is Wayne from Erdington in Birmingham. Watching Starmer squirm his way through that. Priceless, mate. Keir Nokia strikes again. The man couldn't lie straight in bed. Mr. Anderson is correct. Keep up the good work, fellas. Have a great show.
Mr. Speaker, I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in the Foreign Office saw fit to withhold this information from the most senior ministers in our system in government.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We've got the idea, we've got the picture. It was all kicking off in Parliament yesterday. Do you believe our Prime Minister knew nothing? I mean, it's a repeat line all day long. I knew nothing. Not only did he not know anything, literally, nobody around him knew anything. There was a kind of chasm between the Foreign Office and Downing Street, the Cabinet Office. Nobody knew anything. What becomes, to me, again, compounds the incredulity of this. Matt Vickers is still with us, by the way, Conservative MP, Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party. I said this yesterday. The killer blow to all of this, and it was raised in Parliament, David Maddox, the independent journalist, who splashed with this story 7 months ago, the day that Mandelson was fired, I think it was, he sent a text to Downing Street saying, sources are telling me Mandelson had failed security. And they wrote back with a stock reply about 45 minutes later. Tim Allen, who was the head of communications there at the time, wrote back and said normal vetting procedures were followed, which is not an answer to the question. But the minute that a journalist of note, a senior journalist, experienced Westminster lobby journalists, contacts Downing Street with that question, then all hell would break loose. Everybody in the communications department had gone, right, OK, where's this information come from? Even if Tim Allen didn't know himself, I'm sure he didn't. He would have raised that somewhere and said, right, we need to find out. This hasn't just come out of a vacuum. This hasn't just been invented by David Maddox at The Independent. This information has come from somewhere. We need to know. So even there, and that was on the front page, it was mentioned in Parliament at the time. Well, nobody followed it up.
We had months of due processes being followed. We had months of he's being cleared through all the security vetting from the Prime Minister, telling the country, telling Parliament this. All the while, apparently, he didn't find out until Tuesday that there was any questions around this.
It's incredible. I mean, he says himself, it's incredible. Yes, it is incredible. In fact, that's because it's not true. He must have known. David Maddox, a journalist, told him.
The Prime Minister knew nothing about it, despite the fact it was in the newspapers in September. He found out on Tuesday, couldn't possibly comment on it until yesterday. It's a joke.
It's bonkers.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Let's have a listen then to Starmer on the failed vetting of Peter Mandelson.
If I had been told that Peter Mandelson or anybody else had failed security, had not been given clearance on security vetting, I would not have appointed them. A deliberate decision was taken to withhold that material from me. A deliberate decision was taken to withhold that material. This was not a lack of asking. This wasn't an oversight. It was a decision. It was a decision taken not to share that information on repeated occasions.
You were told. David Maddox, the journalist, put it the Independent. The Eye newspaper, there it is. I mean, today's newspaper, Starmer, I know my story sounds incredible. Well, it does, because that particular paper had already splashed 7 months ago with the story. So somebody, even if in Downing Street they went, obviously, try not to, when you give the Prime Minister the papers this morning, can you not give him the Independent, because it's got a story, we don't want him to know. At the weekend, when he was sitting there with his Arsenal mates, or when he was, talking to his friend, did nobody go, oh, Keir, what was the deal on the front of the... Nobody, literally nobody, Matt, said anything. Let's have a listen to your leader, Kemi Badenoch, in response to all of this.
Prime Minister has thrown his staff and his officials under the bus. This is a man who once said, "I will carry the can for the mistakes of any organisation I lead." Instead, he has sacked his cabinet secretary. He has sacked his director of communications. He has sacked his chief of staff. And he has now sacked the permanent secretary of the Foreign Office. All of these people fired for a decision he made. The Right Honourable Gentleman's defence is that he, a former director of public prosecutions, is so lacking in curiosity that he chose to ask no questions about the vetting process. He asked no questions about Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. He asked no questions about the security risk Mandelson posed. Apparently, he didn't even speak to Peter Mandelson before his appointment. It doesn't appear that he asked any questions at all.
It was a good innings from Kemi Badenoch, highlighting again the incredible nature of all of this, that there was no curiosity around this whatsoever. What he did know, and he's admitted he knew, was that Peter Mandelson was friends with an active paedophile. And again, something I seem to repeat on a daily basis on this point, Matt. He was Deputy Prime Minister when he stayed at Peter Mandelson's house, when he stayed at Epstein's house, when Epstein was in jail for child sex offences. I mean, that would have been on record. Everybody, the security services would have known that at the time. Not as much is made of that as I think should be, frankly. I mean, so everybody knew.
Kemi has played a blinder on this, actually, because without the scrutiny that has come from... You can put this down to one woman who's brought those urgent questions forward, who's held him to account, who brought that opposition day forwards, that forced him to publish the details that he knew, and that we're going to see more documents from, has all come down to Kemi getting hold of this issue and holding him to account. He's a rotter. It's wrong. He shouldn't have been allowed. But you're right. It stinks. It's unbelievable. But there is a track record. This isn't stuff that wouldn't have been known. This isn't things that were hidden. In fact, the Prime Minister at the dispatch box was forced to say he knew at the time of appointing him that Mandelson was the best of best chums and had stayed at his house after the guy had been charged, after he'd been convicted. It absolutely stinks. But there was another part to yesterday's debate that went on. You saw Kemi Badenoch, in an unprecedented move, give him the question she was going to ask him in advance, probably in an effort to get him to answer it. There's another big issue going on with Starmer.
Did she just hand that over the table?
She'd given him them. She published them on Twitter. She gave them in advance.
Told him. Okay.
So because we've got to this point with Keir Starmer where he is becoming, beyond all of this embarrassment, beyond the fact that he is appointing his rotten chums to roles in this country paid for by the taxpayer, we've got to a point where this man turns up to Prime Minister's questions every Wednesday and seems to have forgot the notion. Even the Speaker is having to call him out. We always talk about politicians dodging questions. It's always been a thing. There's never been a point where the Prime Minister stood at a dispatch box, a previous Prime Minister stood at a dispatch box, and not even tried to respond to the question that is posed to them. It's made an absolute laughingstock, a mockery of Prime Minister's questions and the scrutiny of government. And it's reached unbelievable levels. And now we get to the point with this, where he is refusing to answer questions put directly to him. It absolutely stinks. It undermines the position of the Prime Minister in this country.
Let's have a listen to a couple of other voices here. It's worth having a listen. Do you remember Ed Davey? He's still there, leader of the Lib Dems, ditched his water skis yesterday to come into Parliament, not on a zip wire, but there he was, suited and booted, ready to go, and he wasn't happy either. Ed Davey, leader of the Lib Dems.
I'm afraid the fact that he even had to make the statement today shows how badly he has failed, how badly he has let down the millions of people across our country who are so desperate for change. He blames his officials. He says he had no idea. He gives every impression of a Prime Minister in office, but not in power.
A well-used line, in office, but not in power.
A lawyer, not a leader.
A lawyer, not a leader.
It's all about
very
process.
lawyery.
It's all about waffle. It's all about anything to distract from the facts. The fact that he's completely, he's shown an utter lack of judgment in appointing this rotter.
There were a couple of other MPs who found themselves in hot water with the Speaker of the House of Commons, because, of course, one thing you can't do in Parliament, you can't call somebody a liar. And if you call somebody a liar, you're asked initially to retract it, and then everything is tickety-boo. If you don't retract it, get out of my pub. You're gone. You're gone, banished to the corridors of West. How long are you suspended for in those moments?
It depends. I think actually if you just chucked out as Lee was yesterday, I think you kind of get away with it. However, if you make a bit too much noise, the Speaker, I think you call it naming you, in which case...
I'm naming you, yes.
If you are named, I think you actually stop getting paid. So what you tend to find is that MPs are very well behaved just before a recess, because if they get kicked out and stop getting paid before the summer holidays, they lose their summer's money. So they're much more well behaved at the end of a term than they are during a term. That's a good little factoid.
Well, for Reform UK, Lee Anderson had this to say, and this is what happened.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The problem the Prime Minister's got is no one believes him. The public don't believe him. The MPs on this side of the House don't believe him. His own gullible backbenchers don't believe him. So does the Prime Minister agree with me? He's been lying.
Prime Minister. Sorry, we don't use those words, and I'm sure the member's withdrawn it.
Mr. Speaker, I have the greatest respect for you and your office, but I will not withdraw. That man couldn't lie straight in bed.
Order. Mr. Anderson, you'll have to leave.
And it wasn't just Lee that was told to leg it for the corridors. Zara Sultana, now well, not really an independent MP, a U-Party MP, the other one in Jeremy Corbyn's party. She suffered a similar fate. Here it is.
You have no duties. It's my duty to carry out and control this House. One chance. Do you want to leave? No, we're not.
Mr. Speaker, I have a duty to the House. My
Right.
wants to tell the truth. And the Prime Minister is
I name Zara Sultana. Minister, I beg to move that the name, the said member, be suspended from the House.
Mr. Speaker, call Jane Kitchener.
Jane Kitchener.
I beg to move that Zara Sultana be suspended from the service of the House.
The question is that Zara Sultana be named and leave this House. All those in favour? Aye. Leave. I'm sorry you've done this. I really am.
I really am. And off she trotted.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting how that procedure works very swiftly, isn't it? That an opposition MP then puts that motion through and there's a little iron...
Yeah, so I think that process, that naming and that voting thing is the bit that costs her a day's wages. I think that's what unfolds there. I think Lee probably got away with it because he behaved and left when he was told. But there's all this thing about MPs who get rewarded by the parties for getting told off by the Speaker, for making a bit of noise, for distracting.
Yes.
Because actually, when you're at that dispatch box and you're trying to speak, it's very easy to get distracted by the gurning and the noises and the racket and whatever they might be shouting. Because you can't always hear it. When you're watching it on the telly, you can't actually hear everything that you can hear if you stood at that box. Because there's only the mic above your head that's turned on. So you can hear what's going on. The public can't hear some of the things that are being shouted at you or heckled at you. It's a distracting place. And if you can perfect the art of the heckle in there, you can usually do quite a good job for your party.
When I was in the press gallery, Matt, it was an interesting vantage point, because of course you're above it all, so you're looking down on it, which is good and bad, because you do see the entirety of it all, and that's quite impressive. But what you do slightly miss are the sort of face-on visuals, because you're looking down. I mean, it's still a great place to be.
All the baldy heads. It looks like a box of eggs, does it? It's like...
Well, I mean, it was always good. You know, we used to spot people on, you know, what they were doing on their phones. Could we see? So you couldn't get your own phone out to zoom in and have a look, because that would be, you know, you're not allowed to do that either. But
they're all busily looking at tractors and what have you, and
a lot of tractor detail. Don't undermine the debate on tractors.
Well, I think there's a really interesting point about phones in the chamber, because I remember somebody emailing me. She's like, "It's a disgrace. I turn on Parliament TV and you're all on your phones." Well, actually, sometimes you can be trapped in there for several hours waiting for your opportunity to speak.
Yeah.
And I remember emailing somebody. I said, "Well, actually, Mrs. Jones, I couldn't, if I wasn't on my phone in here, I wouldn't be able to reply to your email. I've been trapped in here 3 hours.
Well, that's very
About
true.
40 odd of you have emailed me. So it's kind of, there's a balance.
But your phone is where your notes are now. I mean...
Yeah, although I do, the one thing that does get my ticker is people... If you see them, they stand up in Parliament, the mother of all parliaments, this historic building, and they read a speech off the floor. I think it looks awful.
No, don't do that.
It does look awful.
Don't do that. No speech reading from phones.
Yeah, it's not a thing.
Alex in Belfast wants to have a little pop at you here, Matt. He says, "Morning, gents. Matt Vickers," or Muck Vickers, as he says.
Muck Vickers, we like this.
Like a little hybrid of the two there. Muck Vickers lets himself down by saying £2.99 is expensive for chips. Alex says they are visually, I think he means usually, visually about £4.50 from a chip shop. The rest of us don't eat our chips in the subsidised MP's canteen.
Come up to Stockton and I'll take you to a cheap chippy.
Yeah, there you go. In fact, I can't remember what chips cost how subsidised chips are in the parliamentary canteen.
I'm not a big chip
They're not
eater in Parliament, actually.
It should be said, by the way, there is a bit of an over myth. Food in Parliament isn't subsidised, it's just not profit-making.
Well, so apparently, I was asking about this, so apparently the subsidy is because the place stays open. So if you went to a cafe or a shop or whatever in the street, it opens for the hours that it's profitable. If you go to the one in Parliament, because, well, last night I was in there until 10 o'clock. I was speaking at 10 o'clock last night, then you dragged me out of bed this morning to come here. But because it has to stay open that late, because people might be trapped in there till the early hours of the morning, they can't really predict when they're open. That's where the subsidy thing comes in, apparently.
Right.
So
it's there to accommodate staff.
You're keeping the place
not
open.
just MPs.
Yes. If there's people who are having to work there, if clerks are having to work there till the early hours of the morning, and they want to be able to access food or drink, well, they aren't able to pop out, so they need to be able to eat in the bed. So I think that's apparently where the subsidy bit comes from.
Yes, it's not a case of everybody is paying for MPs' food in that kind of conventional sense, even though sometimes it's not like an MP can go, I think I'll have my wedding reception.
It's northern prices.
Costs 25 quid for 38 people. Back to chips. We always have the light and shade here on Talk Breakfast. Of course we do. On chip vending machines. This comes from Elle. Morning, Elle.
We used to have a chip vending machine at the ice skating rink at Milton Keynes. And it is actually real chips, but they're frozen. You can hear them frying, and you get about as much as you do in a McDonald's packet, like a little sachet of them. So they're not that good.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
20 to 7, Ian Collins in for Jeremy Carl for this week on Talk Breakfast. So much comment on this, and we asked a very simple question. Do you believe Keir Starmer? Because Keir Starmer didn't know anything, right? We thought, he's the Prime Minister. He knows stuff. He knows things like nobody else knows, because you get all that secret kind of information and briefings. But not on this occasion, nothing whatsoever. Let's get a voice note on Starmer. It comes from Pete. Morning to you, Pete.
Good morning, Ian. I'm fed up with this Prime Minister always trying to plead ignorance and blame other people for everything. You know something? It wouldn't have mattered about any of this, right? Because Peter Mandelson has had a bad reputation for decades. He shouldn't have been even considered for any job at all. So what we need to be asking is the proper question. Why did the Prime Minister want him in that job?
Indeed, and Diane Abbott raised a similar point, and many others did. Why? What was the Because there was a story yesterday. One journalist told us that actually, initially, Starmer wasn't that keen on Mandelson.
Well, you heard,
but that seemed to go out the window quite quickly.
You heard John McDonnell yesterday talking about the fact that this was some effort to appease people who'd supported him in the leadership election to bring wings of his back. Because this guy woke up this morning, the Prime Minister woke up this morning and worked out how he's going to keep the keys to number 10 for the rest of today. And tomorrow he'll wake up and think the same thing. And that's about buying people off, appeasing people, bringing crowds of people with him.
Yes.
I mean, the other reason that Starmer is going to be there for a very long time yet is A, the processes aren't there to get rid of him, but B, all of the people who were likely to replace him have got their own problems at the moment. You've got Angela Rayner, who's got her tax problems, but you've also got Wes Streeting, who was thought to be, could be the next guy maybe, but he's also hooked up with Peter Mandelson. He's way too connected to Peter Mandelson. We saw the text, didn't we? He published his text between him and Peter Mandelson with all the kisses and reviews on and what have you. All of the people who might replace Starmer have disappeared. Well, I think Ed Miliband might still be in the running. But yeah, I think that's part of the reason Starmer's going to be there, is because so many other people are still connected to him. But balancing all these interests, trying to keep the keys to number 10 means that Starmer is willing to buy people off. He's willing to give in on policies that he was all about, that he believed in, because it's the one thing that keeps him in office.
It is still building mood music, though, isn't it? This is a sort of crescendo moment in all of the ineptitude around Starmer, and May the 7th will be the kind of bullseye moment. Bang! It's like, it's got to be curtains. This is how many of his own MPs will see it. So this is like a cruel hors d'oeuvre for Starmer in many respects, because the big moment will come May the 7th, and then you put it all together, and rightly or wrongly, particularly it happens in all walks of life, particularly in politics, perception becomes reality. And if the perception, the tipping point has been hit, the man looks woeful, he looks incapable, and he looks now like an electoral distraction, a disaster. So the sharks will circle come mid-May, surely.
Well, the problem is there's not a plan B. There isn't a life raft there. You're going to put yourself on Miliband's boat, you're going to put yourself on... There isn't a plan B. But then, I mean, the one thing that has changed in the last couple of months is that you speak to Labour MPs quietly in the corridor, and they used to be quite defensive. They've now given in on this. They know they're going to hell in a handcart. They know that this thing is a disaster. They don't know where to go, though, is the problem. And not only do they not know where to go, everybody you speak to who seems to think they have the answer has a very different answer. You've now seen a Labour Party that started fighting with itself. You saw John McDonnell speaking yesterday. I don't know whether you saw it on screen, but you saw Rachel Reeves turning round to tell him what she thought, because she's obviously hooked to Starmer. He's her only meal ticket, really. She was defending Starmer quite aggressively in a very public setting. The fractures are there. The thing is starting to fall apart. You can't hold this coalition of beleaguered souls together much longer. But where it goes, I don't know.
So some of those backbenchers are not as buoyant as they once were. One of the greatest sights you can walk through those ornate corridors of Parliament. You can see the statues, the old library collections, the ornate wood, everything that it stood for, the various feet that have walked those same journeys. But nothing is more delicious than a quivering socialist just behind the Speaker's chair. That is always going to be the sight where you go, that's why I came here. And you're seeing a lot of quivering now.
There's a lot of quivering going on. There's a lot of, it's the silence. It is the silence that gets them, and there is a lot of silence behind Starmer now.
But you see, you mentioned about, I mean, Ed Miliband is kind of, and I don't get this at all, bearing in mind he's had one go at the job and lost an election, so he's already tried. But apparently he's popular with party members.
Well, we said tried, tested and failed. But you know what? People do come back. That's why we're where we are. We've got a guy who's been sacked from government twice in the most public of ways, who came back to be the ambassador to the US and has now taken the Labour Party down again. These people do come back. These people are just recycling. I mean, there's no bigger proponent of recycling than Ed Miliband.
Well, indeed. So he would argue he's merely being consistent with his existing beliefs. But Ed would like the job. Everybody knows that. And if there's a sufficient body of support from MPs, and of course, because of the way the system works with Labour and the wider membership, then he's going to put his hat in the ring.
Somebody suggested yesterday, I think it was probably quite true, that if Andy Burnham had been an MP now, Keir Starmer would probably be gone. You know, if there
It
was
would
a
have
real
already
option,
happened.
yeah, if there was a real option there, if there was something else that was a clear cut, sensible way forwards, then they probably would have found a way to get rid of him back.
Can I just come back on Andy? I've never bought into this. You know, Andy Boy is the secret weapon. He's like some kind of, you know, experience. He's got that extra. So, look, when I first saw Andy Burnham, he was health secretary under the Brown government. Was it Brown? I think it was Brown. He was the health secretary, and he was one of those kind of. He looked like a younger politician. And he rocked glasses. Now he looks like an older politician who needs glasses. And so he's kind of changed his where's this brilliance of Andy Burnham come from? Where is it? I mean, I keep trying to look for it.
Yeah.
Did he do something that was amazing? He's a northern lad. He's quite gritty. He's quite accessible. You know, if you asked him, Wes Streeting's good at this. You know, Wes Streeting can go on the Today programme and he'll talk about Love Island if he has to. You know, he can do that stuff. Starmer couldn't do that. You know, Rishi couldn't have done that. So you could do that because you're working class, accessible. Well, by the way, you don't have to be working class just to be an MP either. But Burnham's got that, but I don't know what this, you know, amazing political acumen that he's meant to possess is.
If you want sense, you look to the north, you know, the Northern Star. I think, you know, common sense isn't so common in parts of Westminster. The thing with Andy Burnham is I think he just seems very normal, seems like the rest of us, seems like he'd stand up for regular people.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's much depth to that argument. I don't know that we've got any experience of him being some incredible bright mind that can fix the country's problems.
Yeah.
But the fact he's more relatable than the other things we've got sat on that front bench of government at the moment means he looks promising compared to the rest.
That's true. He is. I bumped into him. I was doing a police conference, chairing a debate for the Police Federation, and Andy Burnham was at the conference. And then about a week later, it was the Brexit vote, which of course was in Manchester, and he came along to that as obviously the main man over there. And I saw him across the corridor and he went, "Hello, mate, how you doing?" Now, that's very... The only other person that I ever met in politics that was that sort of accessible was Boris Johnson, who was always didn't say, "Hello, mate, how you doing?" But he had a kind of slightly more Etonian way of saying the same thing. He was very accessible and very polite and friendly and happy to talk. But I just can't spot where this kind of this brilliant political mind is meant to lurk in Andy Burnham. But he's definitely on manoeuvres, along with Wes, along with Angela. But I still think Ed Miliband, and somebody said it to us on the show last week, Ed Miliband is going to be the next Labour leader. Who was it that said that? I can't remember. But yeah, they were sure of it. Matt, stay with us. Lots more to come. Matt Vickers still with us on the programme. We'll do more comment. Loads of great messages from you guys. We've managed to combine chips, vending machine chips, with the most poignant and potent and important parliamentary moment in years. Keir Starmer's announcement yesterday that I knew nothing at all. That gets a little tastier later when Ollie Robbins is in the select committee. We'll cross live to that later as well. You can get in touch with us, 0344 499 1000. Leave a voice note there as well, or you can message 87222. This is Talk Breakfast. It's Ian Collins in for Jezza. The time, 10 to 7.
Mr. Speaker, I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in the Foreign Office saw fit to withhold this information from the most senior ministers in our system in government.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, yeah. Morning, Ian Collins in for Jezza. It's a Tuesday morning, it's a lively one, lots to talk about. Keir Starmer is front and centre, and rightly so. Here's a voice note from Andy.
Morning, Ian. Andy from Birmingham. Off out to work again, as you do. I watched all that yesterday, and it was pathetic, to be fair, mate. And if you rope it all back and whatever, you know, what he said, and, you know, you can tell somewhere there's a lie in there somewhere, and I know that's like stating the obvious, but whether they're like little kids when you were young and they're going, oh, whatever happens, I don't want to know about this appointment, I don't want to know whatsoever. That's what I think, with the laughing stock of the world, and you know, watching that in the Commons yesterday was just pathetic, mate. What has happened to this country? Meanwhile, like Matt said, meetings for hospitals have been cancelled. 600 boat immigrants have came in the country. You know, everything's still going while this charade is going on. Why don't you just do the decent thing and resign? Anyway, mate, have a great day. Ta-ra.
Indeed. Look, the front of the Sun today ties in with this. Mama's legacy, hope in troubled times, says King Charles. His mum would be troubled by all this.
Do you know what? 100 years. It would have been 100th birthday today, wouldn't it? It's huge. When you think about, I mean, she was the constant 70 years of service. I remember as a kid seeing this incredible woman. She was the one thing we had in this country that seemed to carry on. A woman who you actually knew loved the country. You didn't think this is a woman who's bad in her time, who's taken advantage of whatever. This is a woman who everybody bought into, everybody believed in, and they knew she had the best interests of this country at heart. You knew she'd have been having that conversation with Starmer. She may well have been giving him a nudge. It's devastating to think that she's not here any longer.
That was a great...
nothing's ever going to live up to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. That was a great voice note from Andy. What I love about our listeners is the true engagement, the amount of people that actually read and bother to look and watch and follow. Most people don't. I've got a little game with my own sister who has no engagement whatsoever in current affairs. And so every now and again I'll drop her if I dropped... I thought about it yesterday. I was going to just send her a message going, what do you think of the Mandelson affair? And she'd have written back something like, was that the bloke that used to live at number 73 when we were kids? That's what she would have... that would have been the kind of answer you'd have got. But our viewers and listeners just brilliantly engage in this stuff, which is what we should be doing in a democracy that is falling on its backside at the moment. Gurdeep says this, morning Ian. Why isn't anyone asking the question why? Why did Starmer replace a perfectly good US ambassador? This was Karen Pierce, who was in the job before. Why was he so quick for Mandelson to be given this role? Plus, why hasn't Lammy been questioned on this? Wasn't he the one also involved in Mandelson's appointment? And now, yeah, well, he was the Foreign Secretary, of course, at the time. I talked earlier about why nobody in Downing Street, Matt, could have just walked around the corner to the Foreign Office and asked some questions. David Lammy, he sat in the office next door to Ollie Robbins. I mean, he could have knocked the wall, let alone walk round to the office. Nobody was curious. Nobody goes, how's it going? How's the vetting?
It's off the scale, unbelievable. But it is. I mean, it's not normal for people to make such appointments so political. These people are usually diplomats who are politically neutral. Instead, he goes in there, he appoints somebody who's clearly a Labour Party politician. He appoints somebody who's been sacked twice from government. Nobody at home is sat there thinking, oh, I thought he was a nice guy. They all know he was a rotter. There's several times he'd been sacked. This is the third time. But this guy's disconnected. He's not like Joe Boggs. In fact, I'm going to do a full, you know those tenuous link things where you get and you join two stories? I'm going to join two stories for you because there is a big story in... So Peter Mandelson was the MP for Hartlepool when he was an MP, which is around the corner from me. He didn't have that northern common sense. He was flown in there because it was a safe Labour seat and they couldn't possibly lose. So they chucked him in there. And there's this story that goes round about Peter Mandelson going to a chip shop. And going in there and ordering the guacamole, only to be told that they were mushy peas. So disconnected.
What is this?
Have you heard this?
I've heard that. I wonder
it's
if it's
so
true.
disconnected. But actually, you do wonder. It possibly is true because I don't know what they serve on Epstein Island, but I'm assuming they weren't serving mushy peas. It wouldn't have been a thing. But more importantly, back to the chip story, because I think it's the biggest story today.
It is the biggest story. After Starmer, the chip story. This is. Let me just remind everybody, a shopping centre is boasting about having Britain's only chip vending machine. Although we had a voice note earlier. Who was it from that dropped... it was from Elle, who said in Milton Keynes... Was it the Milton Keynes ice rink or something? There was a chip vending machine there, which was little frozen things.
Well, we've talked about random, overpriced vending machines that give you soggy chips. But actually, there's a really serious point, as well as everything that's going on with the turmoil at Number 10 and his dodgy appointments and their links to major paedophiles. Actually, the biggest problem in this country at the moment is our economy. Is people being put out of work, as businesses going to the walls. So the big message from me is that those hospitality businesses, like the great British chippy, you've got to use it if you don't want to lose it, because they've got increases to their business rates that are killing them. They've got massive increases to national insurance that are killing them. They're about to be hit by the Employment Rights Bill as well. This government is killing jobs, is killing businesses. Get out there and back your local chippy.
Killing chippies. Well, Carl says, did you know there's a chippy in Grimsby? That's my dad's hometown. I think they recognise that people are struggling with the cost of living and have fish and chips and peas on the menu for a mouth-watering £3. Wow.
A penny more and you get the fish, chips and the mushy pea.
Yeah.
Stop the vending machine, get yourself to Grimsby,
That is pretty. See, only in Grimsby. You can have a pint in the Harvest Moon and then go and buy yourself a nice £3 chippy lunch. Including the fish and the peas as well. Carl, thank you for that. We're out of time, Matt. You're back to the madhouse.
Back to the workhouse,
Parliament.
We'll see what unfolds today.
Indeed. Well, Ollie Robbins is box office from 9. He's been Matt Vickers, of course, Conservative MP with us here on Talk. We're back after the news at 7.
This is a scandal, as you say. If the Prime Minister's knowingly lied, any minister, whether it's the most important one, the Prime Minister, or the most junior minister, lying to the House of Commons is a capital offence and would have to go. And if the officials have lied when they're advising you, they should go.
On the 10th of September, the Prime Minister misled Parliament by saying the full due process was followed. If Mandelson failed the security vetting, full due process was not followed. Misleading Parliament is a resigning offence.
The Ambassador has repeatedly expressed his deep regret for his association with him. He's right to do so. I have confidence in him, and he's playing an important role in the UK-US relationship.
It was clear that the Prime Minister wanted to make this appointment himself and had, therefore, I understand that the FCDO was informed of his decision and acted upon it, and via the Foreign Secretary sought and obtained the King's approval for the appointment.
Even the expectation that Ollie Robbins felt quite comfortable, this is what we're being asked to believe.
Yes.
To hold back this information that he knew that he had that Mandelson had failed the vetting process, and that at no stage that it was necessary to tell the Prime Minister.
It's unbelievable. So he either knew and lied on this issue, or he didn't know, and that's just as bad.
Can the Prime Minister tell us, did the official security vetting he received mention Mandelson's ongoing relationship with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein?
So clear.
The process was going to be spent
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good morning. Yeah, welcome back. It is Talk Breakfast. Ian Collins in for Jezza for this week. Look, it's a Tuesday morning. It's a very simple question. Do you believe the Prime Minister? Yesterday, in a lengthy and frankly convoluted explanation, we finally got the headline, the one we could have all written. I knew nothing. I'm the leader of the country, the supreme boss of everything, but I knew nothing. And despite appointing the most controversial man in modern-day politics to one of the biggest political appointments on the planet, a man with form, a man we already knew was a bit of a wrong, and I lacked any level of curiosity on his security vetting. I knew the vetting was going on. I didn't ask for an update. And even when it had been completed, I didn't ask how it went. Not a cursory, "Hey, Ollie, have the men in black found any landmines?" Nothing. Do you believe the Prime Minister? Elsewhere and fully connected, the former head of the Foreign Office, Ollie Robbins, will take the chair today at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. This could be bombshell evidence. We'll wait and see, but don't hold your breath. Will he contradict Keir Starmer? Is he about to tip a huge bucket of dung onto Downing Street? We cross live to that evidence a little later. In other news, Nigel Farage faces questions over his plans to offer migrants £1,000 each and a plane ticket to leave Britain. Could that work? Your thoughts on that? And Green entrepreneur Dale Vince, one of Labour's biggest donors, is urging Ed Miliband to ditch heat pumps. Oh, yeah. Saying they don't work and give the money, get this, to the armed forces instead to fill the defence black hole. Who would have thought this from Dale Vince? He joins us later in the programme. And, of course, as we mentioned in the first hour with Matt Vickers, a shopping centre is boasting about having Britain's only chip vending machine. It's in Wrexham. It's called Captain Chips. It's in the shopping centre there, offering chips out of a vendor for £2.99. But we've already established, of course, that there's been one in Milton Keynes in the past, so it's not entirely new. However, we've got comment on this. So I told you we've got the light, we've got the serious stuff. We'll talk to Brendan O'Neill in just a few moments' time. First, let's get a voice note on chip vending machines from Damien.
Bit of a fun one for you boys this morning. Damien from Milton Keynes, part of Alarm Clock Britain, out on the road at 4:45 this morning. Talking about vending machines, I went to Israel in the summer. Wouldn't believe what they sell in vending machines there. Steaks, burgers, meat, big fat juicy steaks, all the beef, all the lamb you can possibly get out of a vending machine. Unbelievable. I was astonished, gobsmacked, blown away all at once. What a wonderful place. Tel Aviv, absolutely amazing. Cheers, boys. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, we've not really gone diverse in the vending machine department. We know Japan have got a PhD in weird stuff that comes out of hitting some buttons on a vending machine. And now Israel. Didn't know that. Great call. Damien, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's speak with Brendan O'Neill, chief political writer at Spiked, who's with us. Brendan, good morning to you.
Hi, Ian. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Nice to have you with us. It is, again, the I knew nothing thing. It's only when you sort of put all the I knew nothings together you realise this is and Conservatives did quite effectively release a montage, which we'll play in a bit, of the amount of times Keir Starmer knew nothing. I mean, it's his own words yesterday were, this sounds incredible because it is incredible. I think it was incredible because it's not credible rather than amazing. But nonetheless, I'm struggling with this a bit, Brendan. Is he just inept? Do people around him not like him so they think we won't bother telling Keir Starmer? Does he lack curiosity in the most disturbing way, or is it all of those things?
I think it's probably all of those things. I mean, you know, the choice that he's putting to us is to believe that he's either ignorant or incompetent. That's basically what he's pleading to the public. He's saying that he was ignorant. He didn't know this happened. He wasn't informed. But the alternative explanation is that he is incompetent. He's in charge, but he's not in power. He doesn't know what's going on in his own government, in the back rooms of his own ruling class. He has no idea what's happening. So he's either ignorant and was not on top of all the facts, or he just is not in control of this government and this country. And both of those things point to him being a pretty useless prime minister. I thought Diane Abbott really nailed it in the Commons yesterday when she said, he keeps saying, no one told me, no one told me. But the big question is, why didn't he ask anyone? Yes. Why didn't he say what happened with the vetting of Mandelson for this incredibly important job? Why didn't he show any curiosity whatsoever about what had happened with the UK ambassador to the US? So he really has been exposed as a prime minister who just doesn't know what's going on in his own government.
You're absolutely bang on. The point that I've been talking about for days now on this one, Brendan, is precisely that. I mean, the Foreign Office is a 3.5-minute walk from Downing Street. It's 1 minute in a car, 25 seconds in a prime ministerial car, but that's another issue. Nonetheless, it's round the corner from where they all work. So whether it was Starmer, whether it was one of his many head honchos, and you know how many people work in that building in very senior positions, no one thought to go to, not even a cursory, how's the vetting going? When it was done, nobody thought to say, well, let's find out what it... I mean, really? Not a single person, even if it wasn't Starmer, no one said to Ollie Robbins, did he pass the vetting? They must have been... It would have surely been in somebody's diary on their laptop, or vetting complete on this date, or something like that. Nobody asked.
No one asked any questions whatsoever. And this will bamboozle pretty much everyone in the country, because most people have jobs, and when they're at work, they ask questions, especially if you're a manager, if you're higher up. You say, how's this thing going? How did that thing turn out? How did that meeting go? You show curiosity, you show interest, you want to know what's happening within in your own workplace. Yeah. And now we have a prime minister, the leader of the country, who doesn't do those basic things. You know, the striking thing about Starmer is that he presented himself as a capable man, a managerial leader. You know, he would bring sensible common sense back to politics. But now we know he can't even manage politics. He's the technocrat who's not very good at details. He constantly talked about process, and we now know that he doesn't even do process very well. We all knew that he didn't believe in very much. He doesn't have much passion. He doesn't have any profound ideological convictions, but we at least thought he'd be a bit of a sensible bank manager type. He's neither. He neither has any beliefs, nor is he capable of overseeing process in a meaningful way. He's a busted flush, and I really do think his days are numbered in Downing Street.
Well, let's have a listen, Brendan, to that moment when Keir Starmer conceded. It does beg a belief. Here he is.
I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in the Foreign Office saw fit to withhold this information from the most senior ministers in our system in government. That is not how the vast majority of people in this country expect politics, government, or accountability to work. And I do not think it's how most public servants think it should work either.
So they held the information, but again, Brendan, to go back to what you were saying, I mean, David Lammy was in the office next door, for goodness sake, could have tapped on the wall and said, how's the vetting going?
Or, you know, when David Lammy bumped into Keir Starmer at a cabinet meeting, why didn't they have a conversation about how this thing was progressing? It's absurd. The whole thing is completely absurd. And I think every time I hear Starmer speak about this, it gets worse and worse, because he really is demonstrating to the entire country that he doesn't know what's going on in Whitehall. You know, the thing is that this government promised that they would get rid of Tory sleaze. 14 years of Tory sleaze will bring normalcy back to politics. But it's just been coated in scandal from day one. They just lurch from one scandal, one idiot event to another. And it just feels like it's the most incompetent, uninspiring government of my lifetime. Because at least with other governments that had a bit of scandal, you at least they had some ideas and you could support some of their policies. And you could say, well, a few people might have behaved badly, but they've got a good project that they want to bring to the country. You had the kind of politics would balance out the lunacy. But with this government, there's nothing. They're constantly U-turning. They bring in a policy and then scrap it a few weeks later. Yeah. They're doing things they said they wouldn't do in their manifesto, and now we know they're not even good at dotting the I's and crossing the T's when it comes to appointing the ambassador to the US. It genuinely, this is not hyperbole, I genuinely think this is the worst government of my lifetime.
Yeah, I would absolutely share that. And of course, when it comes to Mandelson, we weren't talking about any appointee here. This was a man that, from the off, would have been a massive conversation in Downing Street. Look, you know, what about Peter? We know that he's, you know, doesn't always play by the rules, been fired a couple of times, divides the room, can easily step on a landmine, etc. So this would have been, you'd have to imagine, you'd like to think that of all people that were in the frame for the job of ambassador, and it may only be really him, but all the one you'd really have your eye on as a Prime Minister, as a government, would be Mandelson, because there was enough around him already to at least raise suspicions. There would have been people in Downing Street and around Mr Starmer that would have said, don't appoint this man, whatever you do. So this was not a straightforward case of Mick Smithers, who was up for the job. This was Peter Mandelson, for goodness sake, nicknamed the Prince of Darkness.
Yeah. Well, exactly. That's exactly right. And, journalists were saying, Peter Mandelson, are you really sure about this? And they were asking questions from the very beginning. They thought it was a crazy idea. And they were phoning ministers and phoning spokespeople and saying, is he going to pass the vetting? Has he passed the vetting? At least some journalists showed some curiosity, unlike the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. But also, ordinary people up and down the country were saying it. I remember when Mandelson's name was first announced for this incredibly important job, I had people in my WhatsApp groups, people who aren't even involved in the media or politics, saying, what's going on? Mandelson, of all people, the Mr. Scandal, the man who's lost his job numerous times for doing dodgy things. And as you say, he's called the Prince of Darkness. So it was obviously a stupid decision from the get-go. We now know, according to Ollie Robbins and others, that Starmer was really hell-bent on making it happen and seemed to push it through. We don't know what Ollie Robbins is going to say today. I agree with you that we shouldn't hold our breath, because it's possible that he might have been offered something, or he might have signed a deal, or he might be in a peerage in the future. We don't know what's been decided behind closed doors, so he might not spill all the beans. But it does seem, from what the little snippets of information that are coming out, that actually Starmer really pushed through this appointment, didn't think about it seriously, didn't ask questions, and that means the buck stops with Starmer.
Absolutely. And of course, it doesn't end here, because as you just said, we've got the Ollie Robbins evidence, but then, of course, we've got all the release of what the police are holding on to in terms of misconduct in a public office. So all of this this isn't going away anytime soon. This is going to drip, and then in between, while we're waiting for all of this, we've got the May local elections, which are bound to be pretty disastrous for Starmer. I mean, he can't hold on. I think we can all say that now with a fair degree of confidence. So this, yesterday, today, and this week, it'll fill the headlines, but the Mandelson story ain't going anywhere, Brendan.
No, it's not. It's not going anywhere. And as you say, we've got these local elections coming up. It looks like Labour's going to be trounced. It looks like Reform will take a lot of Labour seats, and so will the Greens as well. He can't stay around forever. He's just a very, very incompetent, and he's lost the trust of the public. That's the truth about the Prime Minister, and he needs to own up to that. But, the only thing I think that Starmer has working in his favour at the moment is the uselessness of the Labour Party more broadly, because there is no serious contender to the throne. There seems to be no one in the party, in the Parliamentary Party, that has the gumption or the vision to push the Prime Minister out. Yeah. So actually, the only thing that's keeping him there is the fact that Labour itself is a bit of an exhausted machine, and there are no longer those kind of factions vying for power, vying for influence. It's all just become incredibly divisive. They're all a bit self-driven. It's just a collection of individuals rather than an actual party. So Starmer can cling on by default. Angela Rayner is apparently nipping at his heels, and we know Andy Burnham wants the job, but there's no real momentum there.
No.
And so Starmer can just stay in office and stay in power, stay in charge without being in power. And that, I think, sums up his whole prime ministership.
Yeah, I'm constantly speaking to people, though, Brendan, who are saying, it's Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband is going for it. Ed Miliband is liked by the party. No idea why, but apparently he is. Curiously, of course, he's already given it a go once and failed. So could it be as simple as that? Forget the Burnhams, forget the Rayners. Ed Miliband's your man.
Well, that often happens in politics, where you hear about these names that will come through, but it tends to be someone else who's not been talked about that much in public. Yes, that's possible. And it's entirely possible that behind the scenes, quietly, someone is kind of playing their cards very carefully and waiting for their moment to push Starmer off the throne. And that could well be Ed Miliband. I mean, it would just be disastrous for Labour if they went from Starmer to Miliband, if they went from one slightly boring, ineffective Prime Minister to another, and especially one who cleaves so hard to the net zero policy, the ideology of climate change, alarmism, the kind of things that this country doesn't really want at the moment, because we need to become energy independent. We need more nuclear. We need to get some coal out of the ground and some oil out of the sea. So I'm not sure that's the Prime Minister we need either. I think Labour's days are numbered. That's what I'm hoping. And if a general election were to come around sooner rather than later, I think we would see a radical transformation of politics in this country.
It might also mean we get David Lammy temporarily as an interim Prime Minister.
Yeah.
So I don't want to put you off your breakfast, Brendan, but... You know.
Well, these are the choices. This is, when you look at the front bench right now, you think to yourself, I wouldn't trust any of those people with my house keys, never mind running the country. They are not inspiring or competent people.
Brendan, thank you for your time. Always good to see you. Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer at Spike. Thank you to him. Sir Ian Duncan-Smith joins us in a few moments' time as well to get his take on all matters parliamentary from yesterday. We're also going to talk about Nigel Farage, facing questions over his plans to offer migrants £1,000 each and a plane ticket to leave Britain. Thomas Godfrey from The Sun will be with us on that one as well. So much coming in from you. And on a lighter note, we're talking about stuff you get in vending machines. Inadvertently, we've moved into a... it was really about chips, because there's a chip shop, a chip vending machine in the shopping centre in Wrexham, which claimed to be the first of its kind. We now know that there's previously been a chip vending machine in Milton Keynes, at least. I'm sure we'll find out about others, which has spawned a conversation about two things. One, the price of fish and chips, and secondly, what you get out of a vending machine. It's curious the further you go around planet Earth. Details to come, 03444991000. And is this good news for Rachel Reeves? This is just breaking. The rate of UK unemployment fell to 4.9% in the 3 months to February. That's down from 5.2% in the 3 months to January. It's small, but is it significant? Details on that too. 7:20, this is Talk.
Any minister, whether it's the most important one, the Prime Minister, lying to the House of Commons is a capital offence and would have to go.
The week before the attack, he was off to try and do a different attack, and he was eventually stopped by his dad. So the second time it happened, where they also knew he ordered a cab and took out a knife from the house, they never once called the police.
First rule of politics, don't slam the Pope. Don't have a go at the Pope, because you lose the Catholic vote at a stroke. I'm not a big fan of Pope Leo. I like his brother.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hi, good morning, Ian Collins in for Jezza for the rest of this week right here at the home of Common Sense. This is Talk. We're talking all matters Starmer, dominating the headlines this morning. Is he on a collision course with Ollie Robbins, who gives his evidence to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee at 9 this morning. Let's get a voice note. This comes from Laura.
Morning, Ian. Laura here from Kent.
I've been listening to Starmer lying, but I'm sorry, if we can't get him out, then the government should get him out. Otherwise, they're as dishonourable as he is. They should all, en masse, resign, because if there's no cabinet and if there are no ministers, then he cannot continue in his role. So if they don't resign, they're as dishonourable as Starmer is.
It's a fair point. Laura, thank you for that. Just before we speak to Ian Duncan-Smith, let me just play you this as well. This is a montage the Conservative Party put together on that, well, becoming almost a bit of a catchphrase now. I knew nothing.
I wasn't told that it failed security thing and resign.
Let's get a word from Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, former Tory party leader, of course. Sir Ian, good morning to you. Have we ever had a leader so uninformed about pretty much everything around him?
Well, I think his excuses are staggering. I mean, he falls back on the I didn't know, I wasn't told, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
And I don't see when you aim to become the Prime Minister of this country and run a government that you really have the right to make that excuse, because you make it your business to know. A couple of things that are really important about this. He's been, how can we put it, economic with the actuality, as I remember one civil servant saying. He's not actually telling the truth about all of this. So here we have a man that was so determined with his staff to get Mandelson on board. I mean, it was ridiculous. They really wanted him on. They thought he had some magical touch that would save them from their other problems, etc. He would go to America and create such harmony with the United States. So they cast everything aside in the pursuit of him. All the warnings were already there. Now, I'm sanctioned and have been sanctioned by the Chinese government. And so I've spent my time building up an organisation called the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. It's got 43 countries in it, all worried about the threat of China, linked to Russia, North Korea and Iran. So we had a dossier of all of his links with China, with Chinese companies that were run by the state interference, his meetings, I'm told, with President Xi, and then his stuff in Russia too, his non-exec position on a company that was doing business on the munitions front for Russia, staying there after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. All of these things were giveaways, and that essentially is enough to say no, let alone the Epstein stuff, which, to be fair, wasn't as known, but this stuff about his security risks was known, and therefore everybody in government knew that he was an absolute ludicrous risk, and yet Starmer absolutely went gangbusters to bully and that's what they did, to try and bully the civil service, to clear him by announcing him publicly when he was advised by his own cabinet secretary at the time, Simon Case, not to do it that way, but to have him cleared first before announcing out that he would be the ambassador.
And interestingly, after he was appointed, and this is where it, to me, Ian, gets kind of even more interesting, there was no moment during or once the conclusion of his vetting was complete where we are told to believe anybody, the Prime Minister, Cabinet Secretary, anyone at all, or Director of Communications, Foreign Secretary, nobody thought to ask, how did Peter do at the vetting?
Yeah, well, they could have done. And although the then Cabinet Secretary, who's now been sacked, said it was his duty not to inform them, this is the Prime Minister, the most important vital cog in our democracy, in the sense that he is elected by the British people. And so he is imbued with power. That power, when the Prime Minister says it is the position of the government, then that has a massive effect. Unless it's unlawful, a massive effect on the civil service. But he never asked. So you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't he ask about this? And we have the answer already in what he'd done. He knew that he didn't want to know officially about anything to do with Mandelson's problems. Yeah. What he wanted was Mandelson appointed. And the Cabinet Secretary then made it clear already to the Foreign Affairs Committee when he was asked about this. This is prior to his sacking and prior to this row. He was asked why was he cleared. And he said the government had made it pretty clear, very clear, that this was what the elected government wanted. And unless he is committed as they understood, some heinous crime which they could report on, then their job was to get him through, and that's what they did. Now, that may be wrong or right, but it is what happens in government. So he can't say, if I had asked, they would never have told me. He never asked. No. He never asked.
One of those rare moments where Diane Abbott made a great intervention on that very point. Why didn't they ask?
This is the key question. For all the flurry, for all the insults, for everything else, it comes down to a very simple question. And the answer is there. Why didn't he insist on knowing what the results of that were? Why did his staff? Peculiar. You'd ask yourself this question. Why did everybody behave as though it didn't really matter when they knew it did?
Yeah.
And the answer was they'd already done enough to know that the Foreign Office would clear him. And that was, they didn't just announce him out, by the way, back in December 2004, December, in 2024. They did it with a razzmatazz. You know, it was, this man is going to be our man in Washington. This is the man that we choose. This is just to say to the civil service, defy us if you will, this is who we want. They knew they had made that abundantly clear to the Foreign Office, and they knew, therefore, it is the duty of the Foreign Office, unless they believe there is some absolutely overwhelming problem here that they need to stop him on, to see him through. And that's what they chose to do. Now, we can argue that they may have been wrong to do that, but the truth was Downing Street didn't ask, because they already knew he was going through.
Let's have a listen then to the Prime Minister here from yesterday, Ian, talking about specifically that issue of the failed vetting. Here he is.
I had been told that Peter Mandelson or anybody else had failed security, had not been given clearance on security vetting, I would not have appointed them. A deliberate decision was taken to withhold that material from me. A deliberate decision was taken to withhold that material. This was not a lack of asking. This wasn't an oversight. It was a decision. It was a decision taken not to share that information on repeated occasions.
What was, what do we make of that, Ian Duncan Smith? It was a deliberate decision to hold that information from me. Now, Ollie Robbins, I know I know a lot about him. I don't know him personally. I can't imagine he sat there in an office, just simply said, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm not saying anything to anyone. There's much more to this, isn't there?
Well, I just couldn't believe it when he came up with this, was that everybody was to blame. It wasn't me. It was a big boy did it and ran away. I mean, this is just like being back at your primary school. Yeah. This is, what you've been caught out by a teacher and you go, well, my fault was him over there. And that's what this is all about. The thing is, they must have known what the rules were. The previous Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, made it abundantly clear to them that the way to proceed with this, if this is what they wanted, was to first let this inquiry take place, then the checks, and then the decision about whether or not he was a risk, and do it literally behind closed doors without announcing this out to the public. So you've got to ask yourself this question, for all that excuse, why did they choose to announce him out in such a public way before he was cleared? And the point I tried to make yesterday to him was, what was it that you didn't know when you picked him that somehow they were going to find out in the security checks? Because everything pretty much, even the beginnings of all of his links with Epstein, were already out there.
Correct.
He'd already been accused to some degree. I know we got to know more about this as the year went on, but that doesn't really matter. There was enough there to say, oh, wait a minute. Then there was the China links, this egregious, greedy man. Then there were the Russian links. And then there was the Deripaska links. This is the Putin close associate, oligarch, who had cornered Russian markets on aluminium because he'd been given all this by Putin. He, very wealthy man, had a yacht. Now, Mandelson, he was trade secretary for the EU, while the EU was negotiating, which included him, with the Russians on tariffs on Russian aluminium. He was on a yacht on a freebie with the man that was basically the aluminium man of Russia. I mean, in what world was this happening? And finally, of course, this is the same man that got sacked twice from cabinet. Now, you tell me any one of those things would have been enough to have any sensible prime minister say, we can't do this, you know, he's toxic, we cannot touch him. Didn't need to know about the full extent of his links with Epstein. Everything else was enough to say, don't touch him with a barge pole.
Yeah.
Why, therefore, would they do what they did? And the answer was because they knew if they gave it the bum's rush, if they put pressure on the Foreign Office, they would clear him for the position.
Well, I mean, in very simplistic terms, I've said this throughout, Ian. I mean, the man's nickname was the Prince of Darkness, for goodness sake. I mean, if anyone needed a bit of vetting, it was going to be this fella. And that's before knowing all of the things you've just mentioned. Peter Mandelson, of course, denies any wrongdoing, but there's no doubt about it that there was enough evidence that anybody knew this. You know, if his name came across your desk, you would your first instinctive answer, I would have thought, as an astute political operator, which is what we expect Prime Minister to be, your first instinctive answer would be no.
Yes, back in September of 24, I was raising these issues about Mandelson's suitability because the rumours were rife that he was going to be appointed. And this is about the time that Simon Case actually warned him that he should do it the proper way. I was saying we have evidence galore on his links with China. He is dodgy. Very dodgy, and his record was dodgy. And I said at the time he is unsuitable to be picked as the Prime Minister, as the ambassador to the United States by any government, let alone this government. Even Tony Blair knew about all this and was astonished, I'm told, that he was about to be appointed. It's just madness. And the only person, I'm afraid, I hate saying this, but the only person that bears the blame for this, not his subordinates, because they do as they're told, not the cabinet secretary, because he was acting in accordance with what the Prime Minister knew would happen. It's the Prime Minister. He is the executive head of the British government, elected and imbued with power. And he chose not to use that power in the one critical moment when it simply was, why didn't he ask the question? And there's a crime novel which starts with the one thing, why didn't they ask? And that's the question. Why didn't he ask? And the answer is because he knew very well what he wanted the answer to be.
Indeed. Just very finally, Ian, and briefly, if we could, Ollie Robbins, 9 o'clock, Foreign Affairs Select Committee. We know that Emily Thornberry, who chairs that committee, is already rather unhappy with events. She's unhappy for many reasons, but specifically in this area, that she's had some of these mandarins in front of her committee before. Are we likely to get a kind of contradiction here? Is he likely to say anything that you think is going to drop even further suspicion on what the Prime Minister knew?
He doesn't strike me. I've known him and met him on a number of occasions, and he was involved in all the Brexit negotiations. So we've got to know him a little bit. He is a lifer. In other words, he is somebody who's spent his life in the civil service. And by and large, for all their, at times, the jokes about them and everything else, and there is incompetence in the civil service as much as there is anywhere else. But the main thing about it is that he was clear when he last saw the Foreign Affairs Committee, and there was something very interesting that he said at the time when they asked why. He said the government had made it very clear that this was their choice, and they are the government at the end of the day. And this is the point about the civil service. Even though he wasn't supposedly meant to tell them, he did know from the government, because of their behaviour, because of the way they sort of did this big presentation of the future ambassador, it was clear to them that unless there was something illegal, unlawful, that they could spot that would make this an absolute threat, then their job was to deliver on what the government wanted, providing that they thought that the overall security checks were not damning in the way that they became. And that was his job. That's what he thought, because he had been put under pressure to do it.
Do you think he'll throw the Prime Minister under the bus?
I think the Prime Minister is already under the bus. The question is whether he makes the bus reverse back over him. That's what I would say.
Ian, thank you very much indeed, as ever. Good to see Ian Duncan-Smith MP, former Conservative Party leader. Thank you to him. Loads of comment coming in from you. We'll come back to some of those messages too. Let's get a voice note on Keir Starmer. This comes from Darryl. Morning, Darryl.
Good morning, Ian. Great show. I'm 61 and I honestly can't think of a more incompetent, stupid, useless Prime Minister than the current one. I mean, well, the bloke is either trying to be a liar and making a very bad job of it because everybody can see through all of his corrupt lies, or he's just totally and utterly incompetent and useless. Whichever one of those it is, neither is somebody that we want leading this country. He's far and away the worst Prime Minister we've ever had. I can't think of a worse time. It's awful. We just need rid of them ASAP.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Morning. Talk Breakfast. Ian Collins in for Jeremy Kyle for the rest of this week. This comes from Nigel in Brighton. He says, when Boris Johnson claimed he didn't know about parties at number 10, the media airwaves of the BBC and other legacy media was full of politicians, political editors and commentators saying he's in charge and therefore he's accountable. Where are those commentators and editors now? The shock and disdain that commentators treated Boris with when he criticised Starmer for failing to prosecute Savile was massive. We need an independent mainstream media to hold this government to account. Good to hear in the mornings. Nigel, thank you very much indeed for that. I mean, I would say that's true, everything that Nigel has just said. But the thing that makes this unusual, oddly, is that it was The Guardian, a left-wing newspaper, that initially kind of... They didn't completely invent the story. They just blew some wind into the fire of this, because it was already there bubbling away for anyone to see, as Ian Duncan-Smith and so many others have pointed out. But it has been slightly unusual in that we are getting a less partisan response than you might from previous experiences. But Nigel is just right. I mean, it was unequivocal with Boris Johnson. He's got to go. It's like, I mean, the curious thing about Johnson, by the way, again, this is one of those things nobody makes enough of. I mean, he got a ticket, didn't he? He got a fine. Was it from the Met Police? I don't know who gives you the COVID fine. For eating a bit of Colin the Caterpillar cake at his own surprise party. He didn't even know he was going to be there. And there was about 4 of them there. There was him, Rishi Sunak, and like 2 others having a can of Coke and a bit of Colin the Caterpillar cake. Of all the breaches of COVID, as it was known, I mean, really, did that sit there at the top? Oh, my goodness. It was a surprise, but how were you meant to control a surprise party? Let's speak to Thomas Godfrey, news reporter, of course, at The Sun. Morning to you, Thomas.
Good morning, Ian.
Always nice to see you. Let's talk Nigel Farage, because, the news agenda is very Starmer heavy, of course, today, but there are other stories out there. And I thought this one was interesting, that apparently Reform could be about to unveil more detail on this idea of offering migrants £1,000 and a plane ticket back to where they originally came from.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the plans unveiled yesterday at the Reform Party press conference. Reform say that if elected into government at the next election, they'd go on a campaign to remove around 400,000 people with no right to be here, setting up sort of American ICE-style detention centres, as opposed to the current removal centres we have, which don't have enough capacity because they are pretty much always full. And part of that would be an incentive for those who are going to be deported, and that incentive would be £1,000 in cash in your own currency and the plane ticket back to your country of origin. And what's really interesting about what Reform said yesterday is that this would not just apply to people who have entered the country illegally or overstayed on a visa, but it could apply retrospectively to people who have already been granted indefinite leave to remain. We know the party would scrap the entire concept of indefinite leave to remain if they're elected. But for the first time, if Reform are put into power, they would be going back over old asylum claims to work out if any of the countries from which previous governments have given people refuge in this country, well, situations change, don't they? And we know that some countries may become safe. Some countries, of course, may become even more unsafe, which means we wouldn't be able to send people back at all.
Indeed. I mean, this would be... the problem with announcements such as this, on paper they sound very seductive in terms of being a vote winner. But, of course, then you start to put them into action. You get into government, you have to put them into action. And an experienced, a good civil servant will say, it's a fine idea, nothing wrong with it. It's going to take you 16 years to do, though. And there's often the problem that governments face.
Yeah, you run into the Whitehall roadblock, don't you? You know, very often branded the blob. And of course, with things like this as well, you're going to run into the court system, you're going to run into the appeal system, the immigration tribunals, which we've heard so much about in the last couple of years. This morning, we've got into this sort of spat between the Conservatives and Reform about who's copying whose homework. Because the Conservatives say they've got their own plan to leave the ECHR and remove people with no right to be in the country. And Reform have said, well, hang on a minute, this is our idea. And all the while, you've got the Labour government boasting they've removed, they say, a record number of people in the last couple of years with no right to be here. The sort of crux of it is, of course, all three parties know that this is a huge vote winner. Consistently, it's right at the top, immigration, of the issues that voters care about. And so all parties want to be seen as the party of action on this topic. And that is why Reform making some pretty strong-worded pledges. Whether they will actually be able to find the detail and find the sort of basis on which they could do this if they're elected, we'll have to wait and see exactly what the specifics of those plans are. Because you're right, it's a great idea on paper. It's going to win loads of votes for them. It's the sort of thing that they'll have talked over for ages and ages and ages. But whether this will actually work in practice is something that I think voters will have to wait and see for.
Indeed. But it's certainly very attractive mood music to much of the electorate. We'll keep our eye on that story. Front page of The Sun this morning, the splash on your newspaper. There it is. King Charles says the late Queen would be troubled, essentially, by the times we currently living. This is a video address to mark what would have been her 100th birthday.
Yeah, absolutely. 100 years ago today, the late Queen Elizabeth, born, of course, sadly died 4 years ago now in September 2022. And King Charles, her son, marking this huge occasion by saying that her hope was to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place. As part of that, the King becoming part of the Queen Elizabeth Trust, a patron of that. He's done a speech to talk about his mother's promise with destiny kept to shape the world around her. We know just how dedicated the Queen was to her duties right to the end of her life when she was welcoming new prime ministers in only a couple of days before she died. And the King this morning saying that he wants to take on that legacy and further it as well. We do know, though, that the world we live in is very different to the world we lived in 4 years ago. There's been a lot of news in the country, in the world, and of course in the royal family that the Queen may have been troubled by, not least, of course, the arrest of her son, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who many reports, many documentaries over the years have claimed was, of course, her favourite son. Now, look, Andrew obviously denies wrongdoing, but it would have been an incredible situation for the Queen to be in if she was still alive, to see her son taken away in the back of a police car. That, you can only imagine, is one of the things that she would have been troubled by.
Yeah, 100%. She'd have probably been troubled by Keir Starmer and the Peter Mandelson story as well, which does have, of course, clear connections. Something you wrote about yesterday, and we actually picked up on it as well, was the number of people claiming disability benefit for food intolerances, which has gone up by 500%. What's going on?
I know. Well, look, for years now, people have accused the government of being soft on personal independence payments, but normally it's about things like anxiety, it's ADHD. It's these conditions which sort of exist in a little bit of a grey area, where if you can get a diagnosis, you know you can then get on the benefits ladder. Well, also, we found out through our research, there's 120 different conditions for which the number of people being awarded PIP has doubled or more in 5 years. And that includes a staggering, really, 550% increase for people getting £75 a week, and in some cases £114 a week, because they have food intolerances. So it's 12 people in 2021. Last year it was 78 in total getting this allowance. It just shows that there are many people with claims that may not be the most legitimate ripping the government off. We know that every time the government has gone to the House of Commons with proposed welfare reforms to bring down the benefits bill, it's been Labour backbenchers who have rebelled, and now it's costing us from putting things like this cash into defence, into other spending. And that really is going to get more problematic if the size of the welfare state continues to swell. Incredibly, for the first time earlier this year, the total cost of the welfare state, $333 billion, exceeded the amount of revenue taken in by the Treasury from income tax. And that is a staggering inflection point. And the stats underneath it, 550% increase as well. That is simply not sustainable by anyone's imagination.
Indeed. Years ago, I discovered I had an intolerance to red Leicester cheese. So maybe I could do, have you had an allergy that wasn't your fault kind of ads? Maybe there's a retro claim I can put in there.
Very possibly. You could have backdated pay of £75 a week. I mean, the point of this is people are getting this money because they have to go on special diets. They have to take a lot more time preparing their meals. But the case that many critics are making is the bar has simply been set way too low to get on PIP. And once you start extending it to one person with a food intolerance, even if it is particularly bad, once it goes to 15, 20, 100, the number's not going to come down by the look of it, and that is where the issue lies.
All right, maybe you can come with me to the Cheese Tribunal, Thomas, as my carer or something. I don't know. There's probably
You'll get legal aid too.
There's a few quid in that as well. Indeed, yes. It's trebles all round on this one. Great to see you, Thomas. Thank you. Great to see you again. Thomas Godfrey, news reporter at The Sun, with us on the programme. Let's get a voice note. We are talking all things Starmer related. Good morning, Wayne.
Good morning, Ian. Keir Starmer stood up and 3 times said, "I'm not putting words in Ollie's mouth," and he did that on 3 separate occasions. Ollie's statement and testimony is going to be scripted. The Labour Party and, the blob behind, etc., whoever's in charge needs Starmer to fall after the 7th of May. They can't have him trip up just before the finish line.
Mr. Speaker, I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in the Foreign Office saw fit to withhold this information from the most senior ministers in our system in government.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good morning. Welcome back to the home. Try having a bit of breakfast in 2.5 minutes. To the home of common sense, Ian Collins in for Jezza. This in from Ray in Liverpool says, morning Ian, nobody's mentioned David Lammy's role in all of this. He was Foreign Secretary at the time. And are we to believe he also knew nothing? Because I don't. Well, he was in the office next door to the man who knew everything. So at some point, OK, I get the independence of the a security check. It's not meant to be a running commentary, and it's not meant to be that ministers can just nip in and say, give us an update, mate. But at the end of it, you might have said, how did he do? This from Annie in Hertfordshire. Didn't Starmer practice law before becoming Prime Minister? If he was not aware of fundamental principle of law, that ignorance is no excuse. Let's speak with Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List, previously advisor to Chris Leslie when he was Shadow Chancellor. Peter, morning to you. Nice to have you with us. I mean, I'm hearing and speaking to a lot of Labour people who are very unhappy at the moment. Does that define a general feel, do you think, in the Labour Party?
Yeah, I think backbenchers are very, very unhappy. They questioned why Peter Mandelson had been appointed in the first place. And then there's this kind of, it's a scandal that never ends. At least it feels like that, in the sense of the vetting's going on and on. Keir Starmer's defence, I think, was satisfactory yesterday. I think he's going to banish the idea he wasn't truthful, but he's going to come back to his political judgment. I think he can stay on, and I hope he does stay on. But it's clear he's got a battle to win round Labour backbenchers who, like me, they feel he's a good public servant. But I would give him more time. And I think media opinion, quite rightly, I don't think the impact of Kevin Badenoch is that great at the moment because she's only got 100 MPs. But media opinion and Labour backbenchers is very, very unhappy at the moment.
You said you hope he stays on. Are we watching a different Keir Starmer? Which version are you looking at, Peter?
I think, like anyone who's got their back against the wall politically, you're forced to be a bit more blunt, stop caveating, be candid, say how you feel. And we've seen elements of that. He said he was furious over the weekend. I think that was certainly an expression of frustration. But the critique for several years of Keir Starmer that he'd been too loyally, sober, a bit stolid, perhaps not the most exciting Labour leader in the last 30 years.
Yes.
I think we've seen someone who knows he's fighting for his political life, and therefore he's got to show some energy to get through this.
Yeah.
But I do think it comes down to honesty, which I believe he has.
Well, I mean, that will always be a judgment call, and people have their own views. Let's just have a quick listen, Peter. Diane Abbott seems to have made some real waves right across the House with her intervention yesterday. Here it is.
Peter Mandelson has a history, and what this House wants to know is why, knowing Peter Mandelson's history, going back now 30 years, and given what has been known, it's one thing to say, as he insists on saying, nobody told me. Nobody told me anything. Nobody told me. The question is, why didn't the Prime Minister ask?
I mean, that was one of the greater lines I sensed, Peter Edwards, from yesterday. Why didn't he ask? I mean, it's beyond belief. The man was controversial to begin with. It was already pretty iffy. Ed Miliband has been saying this morning that he and others were, very suspicious about him being given this role. We knew his past. We knew the kind of operator he was. We knew the enormity of this gig on Capitol Hill as ambassador. There was plenty of voices saying, don't do it, Prime Minister. This is not a good move. He went ahead anyway, so surely by any measure, the Prime Minister would have had in his diary, oh, security briefing is done on this date. The first question I'm going to do is ask how he did.
Well, what Diane Abbott said does give a flavour, I think, of some and all Labour backbench feeling, which is why I appoint Mandelson in the first place. But we kind of know the answer to that. I mean, she had a pretty withering critique, and she's a long-standing critic of several Labour leaders, but she also made some very sound points. And I think why I appointed him, I think the answer is between the top of the Foreign Office and Downing Street, there's this strange and slightly mystical outcome to the vetting. I'm sure Ollie Robbins, the former head of Foreign Office, will shed more light on this today, but there isn't a straight yes or no given for Downing Street. I was amazed when I found that out, because for a post of such sensitivity, you think there would be, but we're in this slightly civil service language of very significant risks and risks being mitigated. I suspect one of the wider consequences from this episode is that the vetting process is going to be stuck in the bin after today.
Why you think so? You said you hope.
Yeah, I mean.
Okay, you said you hope Keir Starmer stays on. I mean, I would suggest that might now be a minority view, even in Labour circles. But something's going to happen, is it? I mean, this isn't going away. We've got the Ollie Robbins evidence, and then of course we've got the tranche of police information due to come out at some point in the coming weeks or months. So there's that too. So the story's going to continue to trickle. Then in between all of this, we've got May the 7th. I mean, this won't be a Prime Minister wounded. This will be a Prime Minister that's hardly even seen with a pulse. I mean, he's dead, isn't he, politically?
I don't know about that. I mean, I think May 7th, not just local elections, but in devolved assemblies around the UK, is going to be extremely bad for Labour, and we've seen a lot of briefing to that effect.
So he's done. Starmer's done.
No, I'm not sure about that. And, you know,
what does he have to do to be done, Peter? I mean, he's got this going on when the ineptitude is off the scale. He's got God knows how many U-turns, and he's about to get pounded in very significant local elections, which are not just about a few council seats, mayorals, Wales, Scotland. This is enormous.
Yeah, well, let me answer the question then. You know, it's been a dreadful few months for Labour, and it would be totally daft for me to pretend otherwise. But he's got about 400 MPs, a big majority. Economic growth might start to come back, although we're still waiting to see. And the other thing is cold political reality. There isn't really one challenger ready to go.
Ed Miliband wants the job, Peter. He's ready and waiting. He'll do it tomorrow.
No,
he's bought the suit. He's measured up the curtains in Downing Street.
Well, Ed Miliband's still got the suit from last time, and I really like Ed Miliband. And I suspect Ed Miliband, if there was a new leader, could get promoted to something like Home Secretary or Chancellor. But he said he was inoculated against leadership after last time.
No, well, we will see, indeed. Peter, thank you. Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List, previously advisor to the Shadow Chancellor. Thank you to him. Over to you as well. 0344 499 1000. It's just a shade after 8 o'clock. Let's get the latest news headlines.
This is a scandal, as you say. If the Prime Minister's knowingly lied, any minister, whether it's the most important one, the Prime Minister, or the most junior minister, lying to the House of Commons is a capital offence and would have to go. And if the officials have lied when they're advising you, they should go.
On the 10th of September, the Prime Minister misled Parliament by saying the full due process was followed. If Mandelson failed the security vetting, full due process was not followed. Misleading Parliament is a resigning offence.
The Ambassador has repeatedly expressed his deep regret for his association with him. He's right to do so. I have confidence in him, and he's playing an important role in the UK-US relationship.
It was clear that the Prime Minister wanted to make this appointment himself, and had therefore I understand that the FCDO was informed of his decision and acted upon it, and via the Foreign Secretary sought and obtained the King's approval for the appointment.
Even the expectation that Ollie Robbins felt quite comfortable, this is what we're being asked to believe.
Yes.
To hold back this information that he knew that he had that Mandelson had failed the vetting process, and that at no stage that it was necessary to tell the Prime
It's unbelievable. So he either knew and lied on this issue, or he didn't know, and that's just as bad.
Can the Prime Minister tell us, did the official security vetting he received mention Mandelson's ongoing relationship with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein?
So clear.
Accepted that the process
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good morning, welcome. Homer Common Sense. Yes, lots going on. Ian Collins in for Jezza for the rest of this week. Very simple question we've thrown out throughout the course of the programme. Do you believe the Prime Minister? Yesterday, in a lengthy and frankly convoluted explanation, we got the headline, the one we could have already written. I knew nothing. Yeah, I'm the leader of the country, the supreme boss of everything, but I knew nothing, despite appointing the most controversial man in modern-day politics to one of the biggest political appointments on the planet, a man with form, a man we already knew was a bit of a wrong-un. I lacked any level of curiosity on his security vetting. I mean, that's where we're at. He says, I knew the vetting was going on, I didn't ask for an update, and even when it had been completed, I didn't ask how it went. Not a cursory, hey, Ollie, have the men in black found any landmines? Nothing. Do you believe the Prime Minister? Lines are open on that. And elsewhere, of course, fully connected, the former head of the Foreign Office, Ollie Robbins, will take the chair at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in around about an hour's time. This could be bombshell evidence. Will he contradict Starmer? Is he about to tip a huge bucket of dung onto Downing Street? We'll be crossing live to that evidence a little later. Also responding to Nigel Farage and his plan to give migrants £1,000 each and a plane ticket back from their country of origin. And the green entrepreneur Dale Vince, one of Labour's biggest donors. This is really interesting. He's urging Ed Miliband to ditch heat pumps, saying they don't work, then give the money to the armed forces to fill the defence black hole. I mean, who would have thought it? This is Dale Vince, for goodness sake. Mr Vince joins us later in the programme. This from Tracy in Chingford, who says, Starmer kept saying how he didn't know Mandelson's failing vettings because Ollie Robbins was not allowed to tell him. Then he said he sacked him for not telling him. Isn't that, among other things, unfair dismissal? Do you know what? Thank you, Tracy, for that. I did wonder whether, oddly, Ollie Robbins would have an unfair dismissal claim. I don't know whether he would need to go there. I mean, in terms of his, the sense of his own future, etc. But yeah, it happened very quickly. Oh, you didn't tell me, so well, you didn't ask either. The flipping Prime Minister, mate. Let's get a voice note on Keir Starmer from Lillian. Morning to you.
He didn't know. What a load of old crock. Nobody in the country believes a word that comes out of his mouth. He didn't know, while the whole of the rest of the country knew. The man is a bare-faced liar. There's not a word that comes out of any of their mouths that benefits the British people, this country, or anything else. It's time for him to go.
Time to him to go. Yeah, that seems to be a pretty common response. Let's just have a listen to Ed Miliband, however. He's doing the media rounds this morning. Here's what he's been saying.
As you know, I steered well clear of Peter Mandelson when I became Labour leader in 2010.
You said that you stayed clear of Peter Mandelson when you were Labour leader. What went through your mind when you saw he'd been appointed as US ambassador?
Well, that it could blow up. That it could go wrong.
Did you say that to anyone?
I had a conversation with David Lammy about it before the appointment, and I said I was worried about it. I do want to say one thing, though, which is...
What did David Lammy say then?
Well, I think he was worried about it too. Look, I think I do want to say one thing.
People were worried.
Sure, but of course, and look, a judgment was made.
So Keir Starmer just wasn't listening to people like yourself, like David Lammy, like other people who were raising concerns. That was the issue.
He made a judgment. Prime Ministers make judgments, and sometimes they get those judgments right, and sometimes they don't get them right.
Didn't want to use the word wrong there, did he? Funny old political language. So, the Foreign Secretary, based on what Ed Miliband has just said, was not keen. Ed Miliband, senior cabinet figure, not keen. I'd imagine there's probably lots of others that were not keen. So everybody around Keir, nobody told Keir Starmer, really? So when Keir Starmer says nobody told me, maybe Starmer's right on that particular point. Let's get to work with Sarah Pochin, Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsby. Morning to you, Sarah.
Morning, how are you?
Good. I mean, what an absolute mess this is. This is all over the place. It's hard to keep up with this pantomime. It's a farce. It's satirical. In fact, you couldn't satirise this stuff.
It's an utter embarrassment, isn't it? And once again, our Prime Minister is embarrassing this country nationally, but also internationally. People are watching this with their head in their hands. And quite frankly, the British people, as that caller in Lillian said so beautifully, just don't buy it. They don't buy it that he didn't know. Of course he knew. And you saw yesterday my colleague Lee Anderson basically say that very directly in Parliament and then leave.
Yeah, he got kicked out. But, I mean, Lee knew what that was all about, of course. It wasn't a surprise. He knew what he was trying to get across. But he spoke for an awful lot of people. This is, I mean, even Starmer himself. I mean, it's worth having a little listen to this. He talked about it begging belief. So, I mean, the one thing he has fessed up on is how ridiculous this all sounds. Let's have a listen to Keir Starmer.
I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in the Foreign Office saw fit to withhold this information from the most senior ministers in our system in government. That is not how the vast majority of people in this country expect politics, government or accountability to work. And I do not think it's how most public servants think it should work either.
Well, I mean, he's right on that point, Sarah. It is incredible, not in an astonishing sense, as is it's incredulous. I mean, it's the whole thing is ludicrous. There's every step of Starmer's premiership seems to have been curtailed or disturbed by people not telling him things. Now, we've either got a terrible Prime Minister because nobody wants to talk to him, even his most senior cabinet members, or he's just awful at being the Prime Minister because he doesn't think to ask. It's one of those two things.
The thing about this Prime Minister is it's never his fault. He is so ready to blame everybody else. But look, there's nobody that takes even the slightest bit of interest in politics that wouldn't have thought what a disastrous appointment Mandelson was to the most senior and high-profile role as our US ambassador. You know, this was a man that had been sacked from the cabinet for links to the Chinese, sacked from the cabinet for links to the Russians on previous occasions. He was friends with a convicted paedophile. What more does anybody need to know about appointing someone, giving someone a high-profile job? You know, what on earth was the Prime Minister thinking of? And do you know what? The British people are not interested in whether the semantics of when Ollie Robbins said this or whether Keir Starmer got that memo across his desk. Look, everybody knows Mandelson's a bad egg. You know, he was repeatedly sacked. What more did Keir Starmer need to know?
Yeah, and that was Keir Starmer's decision to appoint him. And that's the one thing that is quite clear. He made the decision to appoint a man that had more skeletons in his cupboard than a Romero zombie flick set room. I mean, I'm telling you, this was off the scale. In addition to that, of course, they also knew at that stage that he was big buddies with Jeffrey Epstein, industrial scale child predator and paedophile. So we were aware of all of this stuff already. Plus, he'd been fired from 2 previous senior cabinet roles. Plus, his nickname was the Prince of Darkness. I mean, seriously, how much evidence you got to throw out there to go, maybe he's not the bloke for the job?
But do you know what, Ian? You know, when it comes to hard-working people in constituencies like mine of Runcorn and Helsby, you know, they're watching this. You know, what kind of message is this giving those people about their politicians, elected officials that are put there to represent them on a nationally, in their everyday lives and also on the international stage? You know, what kind of message? It's an utter embarrassment. And basically, that's why I got into a hardcore traditionally Labour seats like Runcorn and Helsby, because people have had enough of this government.
There is also something else here, isn't there? That Keir Starmer, he's not alone in this completely, but he does seem to have a PhD in it. He's not very good at being the Prime Minister. In the 21st century, you need... It's not just a case of, you know, whether you've got the right brain. There's a bit more of to the package of being the Prime Minister. You've got to be accessible. You've got to look comfortable. You've got to be able to look like somebody who makes tough decisions, etc. All of those required attributes he seems to lack spectacularly.
He needs to be a leader. We want somebody as the Prime Minister of this country who is a leader nationally and internationally, a person that knows their mind, that has the courage of their convictions, not a Prime Minister who U-turns at every opportunity because he realises that the policies that he's putting out are just not resonating with the public. He clearly has no real empathy with what is going on in people's lives and the problems that people are dealing with, because if he did, he wouldn't be U-turning left, right and centre on every policy he brings out.
Absolutely bang on. Sarah, thank you for coming on with us. Sarah Pochin, MP, Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsby. Thank you to her. Sarah in Hailsham says, I believe Starmer he didn't know because he didn't want to know officially, as I'm sure he actually knew unofficially. He knew sooner or later something like this would happen, as there was no way that the Epstein stuff wouldn't come out. He made sure no one told him, so he had a childlike get-out. What an absolute embarrassment. That's a really interesting take from Sarah there. Thank you for that. Let's get a word from James Cleverly, Shadow Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, former Foreign Secretary, former Home Secretary. Goodness me, James, I was about to list your entire CV there. We'd have been here all morning, wouldn't we? Lovely to see you either way. You are an experienced man of Westminster. You've been around the block. You've seen it come and go. How believable is this whole story to you, including right up until yesterday when the Prime Minister gave his incredible, to quote himself, incredible defence at the dispatch box? Morning.
Good morning. I think there is zero believability or credibility to the things that the Prime Minister has been saying. And that is a real problem, because at a time when the economy is tanking, when businesses are struggling, we should expect the government to focus on the needs of the British people, and instead what we have seen is they're mired in controversy. The Prime Minister is on the back foot, clearly distracted, and it's completely his fault. And frankly, yesterday's performance made the situation for him, I think, considerably worse. And this morning, we're going to hear from Sir Ollie Robbins, and I think that could be the nail in the Prime Minister's coffin.
I mean, this idea that Keir Starmer didn't know, you know, everybody withheld it from me. I mean, he even pronouned it with me in there. They held it from me, which sounded very weak to hear him speak in that way. That it also smacked of a certain level of ineptitude if those around him aren't talking to him. And we heard Ed Miliband this morning on the media rounds, James, saying that he thought it was a terrible idea to appoint Mandelson. He suggested that David Lammy, Foreign Secretary at the time, shared that view. I would take a good bet that half the cabinet also shared that view. So who was Starmer listening to at this point, or why was he not listening to the most sort of those closest to him?
Well, the fact is, Keir Starmer rammed this appointment through, and we're now seeing Ed Miliband, David Lammy, a whole load of other people trying to distance themselves from what they can now see was a catastrophic failure of judgment and an absolutely appalling appointment. But the thing is, and this is why Keir Starmer's position is so unbelievable, is because everybody knew that Peter Mandelson was a very high-risk appointment. They knew about his links to Russian arms businesses. They knew about his links to Chinese businesses. They knew about his links with Jeffrey Epstein after Jeffrey Epstein had been convicted of child trafficking and child sexual offences, and yet Keir Starmer appointed him anyway.
Yeah.
And this is why this nonsense about, nobody told me. Why didn't he ask? It is not credible that with Peter Mandelson's history, at no point did either the Foreign Secretary or the Prime Minister or any of their special advisors ask the obvious question: has our very high-risk appointee got through vetting without any problems?
Yes.
And they could not have possibly thought that there would be any outcome other than a red flag from vetting.
Indeed, and the Foreign Secretary at the time, just paint a little picture, if you could, for me, James. The Foreign Secretary's office in the Foreign Office, how far away is it from the Permanent Secretary's office?
So the Permanent Secretary's office is exactly one floor below the Foreign Secretary's office.
So you could lift a hatch and see it.
You could bang on the floor.
Yes, indeed.
You could bang on the floor.
Indeed.
But the point is, the relationship between the Foreign Secretary and the permanent Undersecretary, who's ironically the most senior person in the Foreign Office, is a very close relationship. I investigated making a political appointment for an ambassador. And I was told very, very clearly that I could do that, but the risk sits with me as a politician. If you're choosing someone who is not a career diplomat, the risk of that appointment sits squarely on the desk of the politicians. The Prime Minister would have been warned that. David Lammy would have been warned that. They did it anyway, and now they're trying to blame the very officials who warned them that it was a bad idea to appoint Peter Mandelson. That is hypocrisy of the highest order, and that is why Keir Starmer's position, as far as I'm concerned, is now completely untenable.
And what about David Lammy's position? But based on everything you've just told us there, I mean, that would also be untenable. Should David Lammy resign, James Cleverly?
Well, the thing is, David Lammy, actually, technically, is the appointing minister. It's the Foreign Secretary that appoints ambassadors. So we're now having David Lammy saying that he didn't think it was a good idea. Then why the hell did he do it? He was the person, formally, it's his name on the ticket. And so if he didn't think Peter Mandelson was an appropriate person to appoint to be an ambassador, why on earth did he sign it off? Why didn't he raise red flags? Why didn't he ask the probing questions that would have brought this out much, much sooner?
So I'm
afraid he is just as culpable as the Prime
So he
Minister.
should go too. Lammy should go based on this.
Well, I think his position is untenable. There has been systemic failure of politicians. They're trying to blame officials. They're trying to blame the system. The job of ministers is to ask probing questions of their officials. It is not good enough to passively say, they didn't tell me. The ministers should have demanded answers. And if they'd done that, we wouldn't have had this appalling situation.
Well, indeed, but based on what you were saying, James, there would have been a conversation that David Lammy would have had with the Permanent Secretary about this. They would have chewed the fat, at the very least, over this.
I cannot envisage a circumstance where that wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
I cannot envisage a circumstance. And look, I don't know for certain. I haven't spoken to any of the people involved about this particular issue. But I find it inconceivable that there wasn't a quiet, close the door behind, Sir Humphrey style, come in, close the door, Foreign Secretary, can I have a brief private conversation?
Sure.
I have no doubt in my mind at all.
I wonder whether
civil servants would have warned David Lammy about this appointment.
I wonder whether do you think Ollie Robbins is likely to, I know he wasn't the Permanent Secretary when you were there, but do you think he's likely to spill those kind of beans at 9 o'clock this morning?
I suspect And I don't know, because again, I haven't spoken to Sir Ollie about this, but I suspect that he will make it clear that the appointment was already locked in. The Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary had signed it off, it was going to happen, and that his job was to tidy up the loose ends and do what his bosses wanted. He was recruited, I suspect, with the explicit or perhaps implicit task of just making these problems go away. He did what he was instructed to do, and he's been thrown under the bus by the Prime Minister, and I suspect his evidence this morning is going to put the Prime Minister in an even worse situation than he currently is in.
And just finally, James, I would just want to play you that clip of Ed Miliband speaking this morning about his views on this entire thing, particularly about Peter Mandelson. Here he is.
As you know, I steered well clear of Peter Mandelson when I became Labour leader in 2010.
You said that you stayed clear of Peter Mandelson when you were Labour leader. What went through your mind when you saw he'd been appointed as US ambassador?
Well, that it could blow up, that it could go wrong.
Did you say that to anyone?
I had a conversation with David Lammy about it before the appointment. And I said I was worried about it. I do want to say one thing, though, which is...
What did David Lammy say then?
Well, I think he was worried about it too. Look, I think I do want to say one thing.
People were worried.
Sure, but of course, and look, a judgment was made.
So Keir Starmer just wasn't listening to people like yourself, like David Lammy, like other people who were raising concerns. That was the issue.
He made a judgment. Prime Ministers make judgments, and sometimes they get those judgments right, and sometimes they don't get them right.
That's Ed Miliband, James Cleverly. I mean, he steered clear of Mandelson when he was Labour leader, he says, and was concerned because the whole thing could blow up. I mean, these are the people closest to Keir Starmer, and he mentions the Foreign Secretary there as well. I mean, who was Starmer listening to? Why the urgency to appoint Peter Mandelson, the Prince of Darkness?
Well, it is clear that from what Ed Miliband was saying and what he was saying about David Lammy, it was clear there were plenty of people in the senior echelons of the Labour government who knew in their hearts that appointing Peter Mandelson was a really bad idea. Now, we've asked who first thought of appointing Peter Mandelson. It should be a really simple question for the Prime Minister to answer. He should be able to say, oh, it was the Foreign Secretary, or he should be able to say, it was me. He was asked on numerous occasions, whose idea was this? And he refused to answer. I suspect that Morgan McSweeney persuaded the Prime Minister to make this appointment. Morgan McSweeney and Peter Mandelson go way back. I think the Prime Minister did that despite advice to the contrary from both officials and other politicians, and it blew up in his face. And now, rather than properly taking responsibility for his decisions, he's trying to blame Sir Ollie, he's trying to blame the process, he's trying to blame everybody. The buck stops with him. He's the Prime Minister, he rammed this through, he made a catastrophic mistake, a failure of judgment. Yet again, he is not fit to hold that office. That is why we're calling for the Prime Minister to go.
James Cleverly, thank you for your time this morning. Shadow Secretary of State for Housing and Communities, a former Foreign Secretary himself. Thank you to him joining us live on College Green. Let's get a comment from you. Here's a voice note. It's from Liam. Morning, Liam.
Morning, Ian. Liam in Yorkshire. I genuinely think whenever you have anybody from Labour on, apart from the one bloke who actually spoke his mind, that Carl Turner, they're all just indoctrinated and like they're hypnotised. Starmer is rated not only by polls but by the country as the worst Prime Minister with the worst run government this country has ever had. Yet you have people coming on and they're doing the rounds on weekends and that. Oh, it's not all bad, it's not all this, it's not all that. In a few years' time, they're going to look back and think, were I really that thick? Anyway, have a good show, Ian.
Mr. Speaker, I know many members across the House will find these facts to be incredible. To that, I can only say they are right. It beggars belief that throughout the whole timeline of events, officials in the Foreign Office saw fit to withhold this information from the most senior ministers in our system in government.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 8:30, home of Common Sense. Welcome, Ian Collins, in for Jezza for the rest of this week. So many comments on this. Ivor in Chelmsford. Keir Starmer is like the captain of a crashing airliner who comes on the intercom and says, "They didn't tell me anything from the ground." That's probably bang on. Ollie, this one, no name given. Ian, great show. Ollie Robbins, if he backs up lying Starmer, he'll probably be in the House of Lords before the coffee has gone cold. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Is there a sort of a... I don't think he's got any loyalty to Starmer. Ollie Robbins, of course, previously Permanent Secretary in the Brexit Department. He was, putting all of that together. So he's worked across the board. He's career civil servant, much respected. He's not a Labour man by any means. But will he just stick to a kind of unwritten code of conduct that you just don't dob the big man in it, certainly not in public? Or will he lob him under the bus? We've got half an hour to go to that potentially explosive evidence from the former Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office. Let's get a voice note on Keir Starmer. Here's Tim.
Hi Ian, great show. My name's Tim from Stoke. Just one thing that I think on this whole debacle with Mandelson, it doesn't matter what security checks come back or who said don't appoint him. Keir Starmer wanted to appoint him anyway. Makes you wonder what kind of dirt Mandelson's got on him. All seems a bit too suspect for me. Anyway, have a good day.
Having a good day indeed. 25 to 9. Let's speak with Matthew Torbett, former Labour advisor. Morning, Matthew.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. I mean, grim old day to be a lefty, isn't it? I mean, this is where you look at your own party and you think, what the hell has gone wrong? Keir Starmer was meant to be sort of some kind of almost Blairite saviour of the Labour Party, 14 years in opposition. Along comes this shiny, not particularly old, nicely suited, well, we know where they came from now, nicely suited former senior lawyer. And it's all gone it's imploded on him in spectacular fashion.
Bad day to be a lefty and wonder where it's all gone wrong, Ian. I've been doing that for 18 months. Not just today. No, I think in some way it's not surprising that, a man who spent a career being known as quite dodgy appeared to be too dodgy for our security services and therefore didn't pass his vetting. I think it also, to me, wasn't too surprising that somebody who showed particularly bad political judgment, whether that be things like the winter fuel, inheritance tax rises and other things, has shown poor political judgment when it comes to individuals like Peter Mandelson. So it's obviously depressing in many ways for those that wanted to see change from the Labour Party and the Labour government. But that's not just people on the left, that's people that lent their vote to Keir Starmer and wanted more than what they'd had for 14 years.
It's a really good point. I mean, I probably overestimated Keir Starmer in many respects. I just kind of instinctively thought that even if this isn't somebody I was ever going to vote for, but as a man who'd got to the top job in the world of law, there must be something impressively forensic about this man's brain, that this is a fellow that could spot bear traps before they were even laid. He could play 4D chess with a blindfold on. This guy knew where all the bodies were buried. He could work it out. But we've seen really no evidence of that. And most of the evidence about Mr. Starmer seems to be that he just lacks curiosity, which I find jaw-dropping, firstly, as any Prime Minister should lack. I mean, we know Boris was a little bit like that, but lacks curiosity. As a lawyer, you would have thought his instinctive brain would do the very opposite to all of that. But this Mandelson debacle seems to be a classic case. Diane Abbott summed it up brilliantly. Nobody told him, but why didn't he ask?
Well, because as any legal person will tell you, therefore he's got plausible deniability. If he can't be responsible for things he doesn't know about, it's simply, sorry, Gov, wasn't me, I wasn't there, present but not involved, and whatever else you want to throw at it. I think whether it be Keir Starmer and he didn't really know, whether it be Morgan McSweeney may have known or didn't know, or whose decision it was to appoint, whatever happens, number 10 has got to face this, unfortunately, because the thing that I think it comes back to is Sir Simon Case, or Lord Case, as we found out yesterday, said, if you're going to make a political appointee, give us a name and we will set up the vetting, because it's important when they're political to have all the vetting done before any announcement.
Yeah.
They wished to make the announcement early, and they did do, and I've seen Darren Jones touring the studios defending that, saying it's normal practice. It is normal practice because most of these appointments are seasoned diplomats who are whiter than white. They aren't politicians who've been up to their neck in it for years and have been sacked from 2 previous jobs.
Yeah. Whose nickname is the Prince of Darkness. I mean,
quite.
Kind of the sort of evidence might have been there. And interestingly, Ed Miliband, Matthew, earlier talking on the media round, saying that he avoided Mandelson when he was Labour leader. He said that when this suggestion of him becoming the ambassador cropped up, he thought it was a terrible idea because it could blow up on us. Turns out he was right on that. He felt that David Lammy, Foreign Secretary at the time, shared that view as well. Now, it would be unthinkable, of all the things Keir Starmer didn't hear and nobody told him, and there's a big old long list, as we now know, I'm pretty sure at some point, even a conversation in the corridor, if not a cabinet meeting, those very senior guys on the front bench must have said to Keir Starmer, are you sure you want to do this?
He's not a very social being, Keir Starmer. And people probably won't find that hard to believe. He doesn't get involved with people. So I don't think many conversations will have happened. I think what has likely happened is Keir Starmer was indebted to Morgan McSweeney for getting him to number 10. Nobody really expected it when he was elected in 2020 as leader, because most of us thought it'd take two elections at least with how far behind we were. COVID, Partygate and Trustgate all happened, and therefore the sort of Red Sea parted to number 10. And I think because Morgan McSweeney and Peter Mandelson go back 30 years, there was a promise that he would have a nice job. I remember rumours leading up to the election that Peter Mandelson was going to get a big job in government. I think Peter Mandelson actually quite liked the idea of coming into cabinet, and maybe even Morgan McSweeney realised that was one step too far. So I think knowing Keir Starmer and knowing people that have worked for him and still do, he's a man who is an empty vessel and will follow advice of people who he sees as useful, essentially. So he's just gone along with it, which again, sort of, regardless of whether it's his fault or not, begs the question whether he's fit to be Prime Minister if he's a follower, not a leader.
Yep.
And I think the public know that. We saw a More in Common poll this morning that 75% of the public polled don't believe he's actually in charge of his own government. What does that say about his authority?
Yeah, and this Mandelson thing, of course, isn't going to go away because this is going to trickle on. We've got Ollie Robbins giving evidence in about 20 minutes. Then, of course, we've got the release of what the police have on those exchanges with Epstein and whether he brought shame or misconduct in a public office, etc. So there's that. And then Starmer's got May 7th elections, and they're not likely to be good for Keir Starmer. So there is no doubt, really, that if he's going to go, it's a case of when. Of course, the question then becomes, who replaces him? Now, everyone's on manoeuvres, whether it's Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner, Andy Burnham, and particularly Ed Miliband. There is an appetite within your party for the party to go back to its more traditional left-wing roots. Ed Miliband would fit that bill, wouldn't he?
Yeah, but Ed Miliband doesn't want it. I know the papers like to talk him up. Ed Miliband will not be Labour leader and won't be putting himself forward. I can cast iron guarantee you that there's no appetite from Ed Miliband or his office to be leader. I think you're likely looking at Angela Rayner and Wes Streeting. I think it will likely be Angela Rayner because it'll be somewhat of a joint ticket because Andy Burnham will come back with her. There will be a seat vacated for Andy Burnham. I believe there's a plan in place. And he will not be her deputy as such, but he'll be straight into cabinet and offering that support and advice. And I suppose trying to win back some of those traditional Labour voters that sort of flirting with reform and other parties. So I think that's where it is. Angela Rayner's obviously got to wait until her tax stuff is cleared up with HMRC. A journalist did tell me the other day, I don't know if he was playing or not, that it could take up to 3 years.
Wow.
So that might kibosh her chances if that's the case. But it's up to the Labour Party. The Labour Party's got to get itself organised, and they're not very good at this sort of stuff ordinarily. But this can't go on. We're going to get absolutely battered at the next election if Starmer stays in place. And there's got to be a reshuffling of the deck chairs, I would say, before the ship sinks.
There's going to be a moment in either weeks or months to come when we look up at those monitors where that locked-on camera outside Downing Street shows a minion putting a podium up outside with a microphone, and you think, here it comes, here's the announcement. When do you think that's likely to be, that Keir Starmer says, I'm done, I'm going to walk the plank?
I'm not, well, whether he walks is another story. I think it may be a Boris Johnson. People have gone in and said, look, you've got to go because we're all about to resign en masse. I'm not going to relay private conversations, but I would say watch out for movement after the local elections. There will be movement, and I imagine there'll be lots of dancing round at Labour conference as well in September.
Yeah. You've got your tango outfit ready, have you, Matthew?
Well, you know, I've backed a horse for a long time, and I'm waiting for him to come back and sort things out. So we'll wait and see if he does it.
Who is that horse?
Andy Burnham.
Oh,
Andy Burnham's the most obvious, one of the most popular politicians in the country, has a track record of getting things done up in Manchester. I think he's authentic and cuts through to people and makes people feel good, and I think that's what we need.
I did think you were going to say Andy Burnham, but I thought I'd better ask in case you were going to say Jeremy Corbyn. That would have been a curveball. What a curveball that would have been. Matthew, great to see you. Thank you very much for your time. Matthew Torbett, former Labour advisor. And look, these are Labour people who are against Keir Starmer. He's their leader. He's only been there half an hour, for God's sake. 14 years they waited to get into government. Talk about blow it. He says there, word on the street just after the May elections. No big surprise there, but it's interesting to hear a Labour insider kind of say it that way. We're also on a countdown here, around about 15-20 minutes until Ollie Robbins takes the big chair at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. We'll be bringing you that as well. More comments from you on the way, 0344 499 1000. You could drop us a voice note there as well, which is exactly what Tim has done. Morning, Tim.
Hi, Ian. Great show. My name's Tim from Stoke. Just one thing that I think on this whole debacle with Mandelson, it doesn't matter what security checks come back or who said don't appoint him. Keir Starmer wanted to appoint him anyway. Makes you wonder what kind of dirt Mandelson's got on him. All seems a bit too suspect for me. Anyway, have a good day.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good morning. Yes, welcome back. Loads to get through here. 15 minutes away from Ollie Robbins giving evidence to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. We look forward to that. But this is could this be a don't hold your breath moment? No great revelations. Or will he throw the Prime Minister right under the number 7 bus? We'll await that. Also this morning, Ed Miliband has been doing the media rounds. I thought this was really telling. Most politicians, when they've been around the block a bit, tend not to say things by accident. There's often a bit of design in what they say. We're about to speak to Isabel Oakeshott, Talks International editor, but just before we do, I want to play this clip so Isabel can hear it again as well. Ed Miliband speaking this morning. Just have a careful listen to the words he uses.
As you know, I steered well clear of Peter Mandelson when I became Labour leader in 2010.
You said that you stayed clear of Peter Mandelson when you were Labour leader. What went through your mind when you saw he'd been appointed as US ambassador?
Well, that it could blow up, that it could go wrong.
Did you say that to anyone?
I had a conversation with David Lammy about it before the appointment, and I said I was worried about it. I do want to say one thing, though, which is...
What did David Lammy say then?
Well, I think he was worried about it too. Look, I think I do want to say one thing.
People were worried.
Sure, but of course, and look, a judgment was made.
So Keir Starmer just wasn't listening to people like yourself, like David Lammy, like other people who were raising concerns. That was the issue.
He made a judgment. Prime Ministers make judgments, and sometimes they get those judgments right, and sometimes they don't get them right.
Isabel Oakeshott is with us. Morning to you, Isabel. It's sort of, that last comment was kind of in the, some people would say he's horrendous and inept. I couldn't possibly comment. And it was sort of in that sort of department where he clearly wanted to get out what was obvious condemnation of his boss.
Yeah, well, let's just pick that interview apart, because I think it is actually really significant. And as you said earlier, Ed Miliband is not a novice. He was Labour leader himself. He's been around a long time. He knows how words will land, and he knew what he was doing there. So it was a skillfully conducted interview by Sophie Ridge on Sky there, where she teased out that both Ed Miliband and David Lammy had serious concerns about the appointment of Peter Mandelson. And crucially, they had a private conversation before the appointment was made, in which they expressed their worries that this could, in Ed Miliband's own words, blow up, which, as we all know now, it spectacularly did. Now, my frustration is that there's one more question that the brilliant Sophie Ridge should have asked there, which is, did either of you privately or in any other manner, directly or indirectly, express your concerns to the Prime Minister before that appointment was made? The clock was ticking. She didn't have time to ask that question. And in classic political ministerial style, Ed Miliband quickly tried to kind of mask the dagger that he's just wielded there with a quick kind of, judgments are made and, mistakes are made. And he sort of tried to go back to towing the party line. But I think that in a sense, the calculated damage has already been done there. We now know that two of the most senior Labour figures in the government privately exchanged concerns about the appointment of Peter Mandelson when there was still time to stop it happening.
I wonder whether this will, maybe in our minds, if nobody else's, Isabel, but could this be the sort of the starting gun has been fired on the demise of Keir Starmer? I mean, many would say that happened on July the 4th, 2024, but you take my point. With all of this going on, the Mandelson thing's not going away. We've got the Ollie Robbins stuff in about 10 or 15 minutes. We then got, of course, what the Met Police have found about Peter Mandelson. And while all that's happening, May 7th, the election. So Starmer is going to go at some point. I wonder whether that was the beginning of the process.
I think the process, that beginning actually began some weeks ago when Anna Sarwar, as I think you and I discussed yesterday, Scottish Labour Party, he stuck the knife in. It was a bit of a classic move from Anna Sarwar because he's literally at a distance of 400 miles. Long, distance gives the safety. he's not immediately impacted by doing that. His job is his job up in Scotland. But I think we should also be plain-sighted about what Ed Miliband is doing there. He's basically washing his hands of the Peter Mandelson appointment, saying, yeah, there's no way I'd have made that mistake.
Correct.
And he is, of course, positioning as a successor to Keir Starmer. So he is trying to distance himself and present himself as somebody who had much better judgment. Yeah. He went on to say in that exchange that Mandelson has been around the Labour Party for such a long time that, in a sense, his foibles, his weaknesses, his character flaws have become almost baked in. That wasn't precisely the words that Miliband used, but that was what he was saying. That he's, this dark character, complex character with all his massive amounts of baggage. He's been part of the scene for so long, part of the furniture, that I think what Miliband was saying is that some in the party have almost normalised his past behaviours because they've got inured to it, because it's been part of the picture for so long.
Where does this Ollie Robbins evidence sit on your kind of political radar at the moment in this respect as well? I was just trying to think earlier. It's either going to be a complete damp squib and, we don't get those juicy morsels or the explosive moment, and it's all very kind of civil service speak and anodyne, all of that. Or there's going to be a moment where we all remember where we were when Ollie Robbins opened his mouth. Where's your money at the moment?
I mean, of course, as a journalist, I'd love it to be the second. We'd all love it to be the second. But this is a guy that's steeped in civil servicery. He has been a top civil service and diplomat for a very, very long time. And those guys, they don't usually suddenly kind of go completely rogue, do they? They're steeped in the culture of Whitehall, carefully chosen words. And so I don't expect him to go Dominic Cummings, much as it would be delicious if he did. But even the slightest differentiation between his narrative and what Keir Starmer told the Commons yesterday raises the gravest of perils for Starmer, that he misled the Commons not once but twice, did so again yesterday. So I think it's a very high stakes moment for Keir Starmer. I don't know yet if we know what the payoff for Ollie Robbins is, public or whatever other arrangements have been made. But this guy will have been incentivized, I'm sure. I'm not suggesting anything illegal at all, but in the normal manner, he will be incentivized not to bring the Prime Minister down.
And he might have a case for unfair dismissal, as some people have put forward that suggestion as well this morning.
Well, we know that this isn't past those senior civil service figures. They're not beyond making those cases. We know indeed that Peter Mandelson himself wanted a huge payoff. We know that from the very embarrassing emails that were released, that I can't remember what the figure was, but it was really substantial. I think it was like £500,000 or something. I'll go, I'll be sacked as ambassador, but you've got to give me a massive fee. And that's
unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Isabel, thank you. Have a great morning. Thank you to Isabel Oakeshott, Talks International editor. Dave says, Dev's in Turkey, says, remember Starmer ignored what MI5 or 6 said about security concerns over the Chinese embassy fiasco. That's a fair point too, isn't it? Paul in Kent, the PM is toast. I want to know what the Foreign Secretary knew about their own department. Why did they not know their own ambassador failed? Why did they not run their department dry? The Foreign Secretary should resign too, or certainly the Foreign Secretary at the time, which had been David Lammy. This one from Julian, who says, Starmer is the best this Labour Party has got. He was their big hope, the thoroughbred horse they backed. Turned out to be the back of a pantomime horse that you turned at every fence. He's an absolute disgrace. He must go for the sake of the country. The biggest question is who is pulling the strings. Again, there are sort of certain rumours, they're minor compared to the others, that initially Starmer didn't want Mandelson in the job. Now, I think that reservation lasted for about 5 minutes. And arguably Morgan McSweeney, his former head honcho in Downing Street, was the motivating factor behind getting Mandelson the big gig. But of course, you didn't have to know anything about Epstein. You didn't have to, even though that was out in the public domain, you just had to know that it was Peter Mandelson. That would have been a red flag all round and would have required extra care and attention before you could possibly even get to any sort of decision on him. Let's get a voice note on all of this. Ollie Robbins evidence on the way. This comes from Alan. Morning, Alan.
Good morning, Ian. Big Al from Swansea. Oh, comedy gold yesterday, watching that imbecile trying to defend the undefensible. Wasn't me, sir, him, sir, nothing to do with me. I wasn't there, I was... Oh, dear. Mon Dieu, Rodney. Now, later on, we'll have Ollie Robbins. Get the popcorn ready, because karma is coming. And that these people think they're so untouchable, they can get away with it and do what they want to do and people will fall in line. Well, we won't put up with it. It's absolutely catastrophic what's gone on this last 2 years. You couldn't make it up, buddy. Have a great show. But we're looking forward now what all he's got to say. Fantastic. Ta-da!
Some breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
That's something you can indulge in, as to all the people.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
The security vetting for due process was not followed. Misleading Parliament is a resigning offence.
The Ambassador has repeatedly expressed his deep regret for his association with him. He's right to do so. I have confidence in him, and he's playing an important role in the UK-US relationship.
It was clear that the Prime Minister wanted to make this appointment himself and had, therefore, I understand that the FCDO was informed of his decision and acted upon it, and via the Foreign Secretary sought and obtained the King's approval for the appointment.
Even the expectation that Ollie Robbins felt quite comfortable, this is what we're being asked to believe.
Yes.
To hold back this information that he knew that he had that Mandelson had failed the vetting process, and that at no stage that it was necessary to tell the Prime...
It's unbelievable. So he either knew and lied on this issue, or he didn't know, and that's just as bad.
Can the Prime Minister tell us, did the official security vetting he received mention Mandelson's ongoing relationship with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein?
So clear.
The process was going to be spent.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, Ian Collins in for Jezza for this week. Lots to come. We are waiting to cross over, of course, to Westminster. The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, chaired by Emily Thornberry, the Labour MP. And, of course, the star guest in the big leather chair today will be Ollie Robbins, former Permanent Secretary up until about half an hour ago at the Foreign Office. Now, of course, this is controversial for many reasons you are familiar with, and we now know that Keir Starmer didn't know anything. Nobody told him anything. In fact, they pretty much refused. I asked, nobody told. No, you didn't ask. That's the thing. Nobody told you. Diane Abbott even said, why didn't you ask? Well, we're living in strange times. Let's speak with Carl Turner MP, independent MP in Hull East, having had the whip removed. Carl, is that thing coming back to you anytime soon? Good morning.
Well, I don't know, Ian. Good morning to you. I don't know. I mean, if it does, it does. I'm not going to be kowtowing and begging and pleading. They took the whip because I was opposing the idea of doing away with jury trials, which is a mad idea in my view.
Yeah, that's a perfectly reasonable position to take as well. And principled stuff. Listen, you're much respected across the House, Carl. Yesterday was extraordinary in parliamentary terms. We had a Prime Minister standing there explaining to us, even saying it out loud, the stuff most of us might just whisper, that nobody told me anything.
Yeah, I mean, it was a spectacle, to put it mildly. I mean, I don't think he came to Parliament and told lies. I don't think he's the type of person who would come and deliberately mislead the House. But I do think he was kept in the dark. But there's a point where you want to be kept in the dark, isn't there? Because, Diane Abbott was right. Why didn't he ask? If he was concerned, why not ask the questions? And I don't think he did ask questions, and I don't think the people around him asked the relevant questions either. And that's the reality of where we are now. So we've got Ollie Robbins giving evidence to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Emily Thornberry will be hearing from him any time now.
Yep.
And we'll see what he has to say. I suspect he's going to be fighting back.
Yeah, because it's one way or the other, isn't it? I mean, I was talking to Isabel Oakeshott just before the news, Carl, and she was saying, it's possible a man that's, a career civil servant has a certain kind of lexicon from which he speaks. He's going to be measured. He's not going to be explosive. He won't throw somebody under the bus just for headlines. He will be very subtle about things. Alternatively, he could just simply, to coin a phrase, tear the Prime Minister a new one.
Well, he could, and he might well do that, frankly. I mean, look, I don't think this is going away anytime soon, do you? I think it's going to be drip, drip, drip. I think we're going to be continuing with this well into the local elections in 16 days, I think, from now.
Yeah.
And beyond that, and frankly, that's when it becomes too difficult for the Prime Minister to withstand all of this. The election results are going to be shocking, I think. They're going to be worse than we expected now. And I think it's true. People have made their mind up about Keir Starmer's leadership. That's the reality. I'm sorry about it, but it's true.
We've got the letter here, Carl, that goes in. I understand this is to be protocol. Before you give evidence to one of those committees, you send a letter to the chair. So Ollie Robbins, salient points. He says UKSV did not fail Mandelson and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office did not overrule their decision like several other departments. But we can cross to the committee now and get a little bit more detail about what Mr Robbins is saying. Let's have a listen.
Opportunity today to come and speak to you about these matters. As you say, it has been a difficult time, leavened slightly by it being my birthday yesterday.
Yes, all that.
So thank you for the opportunity to set things out. I won't go on at length, but I think there are three important framing points I need to make. Firstly, as you say, when I walked into post as Permanent Under-Secretary on the 20th of January last year, I wasn't walking into a vacuum. I arrived to a situation in which a due diligence report had been undertaken into Mandelson by the Cabinet Office, assessing the reputational risks and his fitness for office. The Prime Minister had then presumably taken advice on his fitness for office. The name had been submitted to the King as Minister's recommendation. The Prime Minister had made an announcement that Mandelson was his nominee without caveats. The British government had sought agrément, the formal diplomatic process for a host government accepting a nominee from the US government, and that had been obtained before I arrived in post. He'd been given access to the building. He's been given access to low classification IT, and from time to time, for case-specific issues, he was being given access to higher classification briefing. So I'm afraid I walked into a situation in which there was already a very, very strong expectation, and you will have seen the papers released already under the humble address, that coming from Number 10, that he needed to be in post and in America as quickly as humanly possible. The very first formal communication of this to my predecessor from Number 10 Private Office being that they wanted all this done at pace and Mandelson in post before inauguration. So that's the situation I faced.
I'm sorry, so there is paperwork about that, and that can presumably will be disclosed to Parliament?
It already has been, Chair.
That
letter from Number 10 Private Office is already in the disclosures made. There's nothing improper about it, but that's the context I walked into. So I'm afraid what that translated into for my team in the Foreign Office, and certainly the handover briefing I was getting as I arrived at post, was what I felt was a generally dismissive attitude to his vetting clearance. The focus was on getting Mandelson out to Washington quickly. Despite this atmosphere, an atmosphere of pressure, the department completed developed vetting to the normal high standard. Because the vetting process is not there to determine fitness for office or reputational risk, it's there to protect national security. And the Prime Minister has already made those judgments.
I'm so sorry to cut across you. We will get on to that, but can I still want to just take it in stages if it's all right with you.
Yes.
Because what I'd like to do is to ask you about, we hear about the circumstances, the announcement, the press release, the King having agreed, the Americans having agreed, the letter to him, congratulating him on it, the access, but it was all subject to vetting, and the question I want to ask is, what kind of pressure additional to that were you put under in relation to the vetting?
Thank you, Chair. And before I answer your question, which I promise I will, it was not I'm afraid I don't think at the point of his appointment and 4 days thereafter it was actually a given that he would be vetted. Again, if you look at the documents submitted under the humble address, there is no stipulation from Number 10 that he should be vetted. The welcome that was sent to him immediately afterwards doesn't say welcome to the Foreign Office subject to vetting. The announcement put out on the 20th of December says that he will be out early in the new year. It does not say subject to vetting.
The contract does, though. The contract of employment.
The contract issued to him after he was vetted says that he must maintain his clearance. So did mine. Okay. That is an absolutely standard stipulation.
We seem to have lost a bit of audio there, but we are going to come straight back to it. Carl Turner, the former Labour MP, now independent MP for Hull East, is still with us. What are you making of this so far, Carl? Interesting that it seems, from what he said there, that it was a done deal, and don't try and dabble with what we've already decided.
Well, you've took the words out of my mouth. It was a done deal. That was the reality. Ollie Robbins walks into a situation where the deal is done. He's left with a scenario whereby everything else is sorted out, apart from the fact that he's got the responsibility to block him if, in fact, it's required. But actually, he couldn't block anybody, could he? That's the truth.
Absolutely, he couldn't block anybody. Let's go back and find out what's next.
Make that clear to the committee.
And that, again, should be minuted. Those discussions should have been minuted, and it should be they should be part of the humble address disclosure.
Well, given your absolutely understandable focus on scrupulous accuracy, that's before my time, but I'm sure there will be papers.
Yeah. And who was the debate between? Who in the Cabinet Office? Do you know?
I don't know for sure. The briefing I had on arrival was that there had been a position taken from the Cabinet Office that, as I say, some of Mandelson's status meant that vetting might be unnecessary, and that had been a discussion for several days after the press notice. It had been resolved before Christmas and resolved in the FCDO's favour. And I only mention it, Chair, because I think to say now that it was always clear that his appointment was subject to vetting is something that the committee should consider whether that's something they need to take more evidence on.
So before we move on then, you're not sure who it was in the Cabinet Office, but can I ask this, was it Was it a politician or was it civil servants?
I don't know. I was not in post at the time. All I understand is that there was a live debate, I think at official level, but I couldn't swear to
it. Okay. So, additional to that, was there other pressure put on you or put on the Foreign Office?
I think throughout January, honestly, my office, the Foreign Secretary's office, were under constant pressure. There was an atmosphere of constant chasing. When will this?
Daily phone calls.
I couldn't say for certain daily, but I mean certainly very frequent, from private office to private office. Has this been delivered yet? Never any interest, as far as I recall, in whether, but only an interest in when.
So when you say private office to private office, you're saying private office of number 10?
Yes, I am.
And who are we talking about there then? Are we talking about Elsa Tarry?
I'm not going to say, Chair. I may no longer be a civil servant, but I didn't come here today to scapegoat other civil servants. I came here to make sure the committee understood the circumstances.
No, I understand that, but I also want to know who the source of this is. And I want to be able to get as much evidence as possible to be able to identify who the source of the pressure was. I mean, from what you know, let's see if I can ask you this way. From what you know, what was the source of the pressure?
Well, I've said I think that the vector I was most conscious of was from number 10 private office. And the number 10 private office is not sort of is a means by which others ensure that things happen. So behind the number 10 private office, who are we talking about putting pressure on the Foreign Office via the private office? Thank you for asking it that way, Chair, because that's the reason I do not want to name other officials in number 10. I think that the private office would only have been feeling this pressure themselves.
We lost it again there for a second. This does happen with feeds to Westminster, sadly. Carl Turner is still with us. Maybe they're blocking things out there for some legal reasons. It could well be that, Carl. But interesting that we hear that essentially the pressure from number 10, we can extrapolate that much, was absolutely huge.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it was always going to be that case, wasn't it? Look, the reality is this, Ian, let's be fair. You know, Max Sweeney was the protégé of Peter Mandelson. He is the guy who was saying to the Prime Minister, get him in the job. It wasn't just advising the PM, it was lobbying for Peter Mandelson. Now, I'm not criticising Mandelson. The reality is the Prime Minister wanted Mandelson to do a job in Washington. That's the truth. And actually, he did a decent job for a time. That's the truth as well. But it was pressure from Max Sweeney to the civil servants. And the reality was, I suspect they were told, do whatever it takes. We want Mandelson in post and we want it now.
Yeah, even just from those few, I mean, we've only heard from Mr. Robbins there for the last sort of 5 or 6 minutes, but that seems to be clear. I mean, he's clearly a very polite, seems like a rather decent man. He wants to make clear that, you know, individuals that might have been working for people and not people he wants to necessarily name. I kind of get that. He's being diplomatic. But I think what we clearly got from there, as you were just saying, Carl, was an unequivocal push, industrial scale push from number 10 to make this appointment happen.
I spoke with David Davis a couple of days ago, who said, look, this guy was the civil servant when I was in the Brexit negotiations.
Yeah.
You know, the reality was he was an awkward cookie. That's the truth. But he was always respected for doing the job of a civil servant. He would challenge, but he would be incredibly respectful to ministers and deferential because he knew at the end of the day, they were the gaffer. They were the people who were elected. And the political advisors around those ministers are also the agent of the minister. That's the truth of what it is in the civil service. They know where the buck stops. That's the truth. Yeah. And if they don't deliver for the gaffers, they end up under the bus. That's what's happened with Ollie Robbins, isn't it?
Indeed. And he says, you know, in that letter, Carl, he says, my guiding principle has been to defend the integrity of the system designed to protect UK national security. And that is what a good civil servant would do. They're not there to be that person's best mate or to side with that person. This is the system. This is how it works. We can change it at some point, but it's the integrity of the process that somebody like him is there to protect. And that's fair.
Yeah, absolutely fair. You know, that is just absolutely that's the job he was paid to do.
Yeah.
You know, he was doing it with integrity, I suspect.
Mm-hmm.
He's not got any axe to grind. He doesn't care if it's a Tory Prime Minister or a Labour Prime Minister or a Reform Prime Minister or Uncle Tom Cobblick. He couldn't give him monkeys. He's doing the job he's paid to do, and he's doing it to the best of his ability. That's my view of it.
And isn't it extraordinary that, you know, Robbins says there in this very early stage of his evidence that there was a dismissive approach to vetting from Number 10. I mean, if anyone should have been vetted out of their own socks, it was Peter Mandelson, for goodness sake. I mean, we knew about the Epstein stuff. We knew he'd been fired twice. We knew he was called the Prince of Darkness. We also knew that he functioned on the international stage. He had a lobbying company of which he was director of. He had fingers in all sorts of pies, Chinese, Russian, you name it. If anyone needed a thorough vetting, it was Peter Mandelson.
Yeah, that's right, Ian. But also, don't forget, Mandelson was also incredibly well respected in the Labour Party. It cheeses me off that I see this person and that person. They can hardly wait to slag him off. The truth is, most people in the Labour Party who've been around for long enough had a relationship with Mandelson. I know Peter Mandelson. He ain't me mate. I'm on the other side of the politics to Peter. I'm supposedly on the left of the Labour Party.
Yes.
Peter's definitely not on the left of the Labour Party, right? But I've got an association with him. He'll text me now and again. He was the High Steward of Hull. People want now to pretend they've never heard of Peter Mandelson, frightened to death that they might be associated with him. It's just a nonsense. Peter Mandelson was always a big figure in the Labour Party, and the truth is, he worked with Max Sweeney to get Keir Starmer to be the leader of the Labour Party and then to be PM.
Indeed.
Stop pretending you don't know the guy.
Let's have another listen into what is happening then, Carl, at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Ollie Robbins giving evidence.
Now, any questions I ask you about this now are not to be interpreted as questions about what is the content of that vetting. All right? I don't want to hear about what was in it. I want to know what happened as a result. But what I want to ask you is, you had a meeting with the Director of Security, Ian Collard, and I understand that you're saying that he presented you with the findings. You didn't actually read them yourself.
That's correct, Chair. Perhaps I could describe this meeting to you if that would help.
And again, is there a note of it?
There is a note of the decision. The meeting itself, of course, involved the team describing to me some of the issues and the way in which they proposed to manage them. It wouldn't have been appropriate to record that in detail. The decision of what we agreed we would do and the ways in which we would manage it is recorded and is available in the Foreign Office. And
that record is part of, if I can call it, a DV bundle. So there's the UKSV paperwork, and then there's paperwork from the Foreign Office, and so those two, there's a part 1 and part 2, and so it's part of that bundle, but it isn't, the record that you're talking about is not a freestanding document.
I think I know what you're driving at, but may I describe this in my own words, Chair? There has been a good deal of misunderstanding about this process, if I may say so. For the Foreign Office and for several other departments, UKSV does not fail a candidate. Nor does the department, no I know, and apologies Chair, but others have, and nor does the Foreign Office overrule UKSV. The relationship between the two is set out in guidance and has been set out to this committee and in Parliament. And so the outcome of the vetting process is what is decided by the Foreign Office on the basis of the UKSV findings and our own assessment of the risk and whether we can manage them. And so what the meeting I had with the Director on the 29th of January, it was an oral briefing. No documents were presented to me, nor did I particularly expect them to be. I have never seen a UKSV document. I was briefed that UKSV considered Mandelson a borderline case and that they were leaning towards recommending that clearance be denied, but that the Foreign Office's Security Department assessed that the risks identified as of highest concern by UKSV could be managed and or mitigated. I was also told that the risks did not relate to Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and that I was told that UKSV acknowledged, I don't know in what way, but acknowledged that the Foreign Office might wish to grant clearance with appropriate risk management. So we talked about what that appropriate risk management might be, and the grant of clearance, the record of that decision, internal, records the grant of clearance and also the mitigations.
So I don't really follow why you wouldn't know the contents of the UKSV and their concerns, or even that they had said that there was high concern about Peter Mandelson. If you can, I don't understand how you can not know that if you are considering what the mitigations are. You can't have the mitigations without knowing what the problem is.
So the risks were explained to me, but I have not seen the underlying documentation. That's what I'm saying, Chair.
So
perhaps, sorry, I mean, that obviously strikes members of the committee as odd, but
well, yes.
In all my years as a civil servant, many of them as a relatively senior one, I have never seen a UKSV document, other than the ones I filled in myself. And that doesn't surprise me. The government makes very clear in public guidance that for anybody to be briefed outside the vetting security process, for anybody to be briefed on the information into or findings of a UKSV process has to be for, I think I quote, wholly exceptional circumstances.
And this is a wholly exceptional circumstance, surely?
No. What I was told was absolutely within normal parameters of a set of findings from UKSV and the department assessing those. They were issues that the department felt it had long experience and deep capability of assessing and coming up with a plan for how those could be managed and clearance granted. That, you know, that is not unusual in this process, Chair. It was unusual, I admit, that I was briefed on it. I wasn't surprised to be briefed on it given the prominence and the profile of the case, but the underlying interaction between UKSV and the Foreign Office and the decision-making process was entirely standard.
When you were given your oral briefing, you claimed that you were given the impression that Peter Mandelson was a borderline case and not a case of high concern, or one that was whereby the UKSV was recommending denial of vetting.
That's correct. I was told, let me be completely precise, I was told, I think, that UKSV were leaning towards recommending against, but accepted it was a borderline case. Okay. And I think it's important to say this, when we're dealing with documents and releases of documents, inevitably things look quite black and white. My understanding is, you know, the personnel security team in the Foreign Office and the vetting team in UKSV are interacting about literally hundreds of DV cases a day. We are a DV by default department, as you know, Chair. That means we have thousands of people who hold DV in the Foreign Office, many of whom are renewing their DV, new people arriving requiring DV. We are one of the biggest customers for DV services.
And I hear you, I understand this, but this really was...
This is the Select Committee Chair, Emily Thornberry, Labour MP, questioning Ollie Robbins with reference to what did or didn't happen when it comes to Peter Mandelson's appointment. We'll speak to Steve Baker in just 1 second. Carl Turner, let's just get another word from you, independent MP for Hull East. I mean, there's quite a lot of convoluted detail in this and what the protocol is around who says what. Do you write it down? Do you not write it down? It really gives you an insight into the whole apparatus of Whitehall, doesn't it? I mean, this goes into layers that we never even think about.
Well, look, this was security vetting. This is about MI6 investigating into people's personal lives, what he gets up to, what relationships he has, what sort of, financial arrangements he might have. I wouldn't expect Ollie Robbins to get that information put in front of him, but what I would expect is a recommendation, yea or nay. And he says they were leaning towards saying no, but the possibility was, with mitigation, it could be agreed. Now, where does that leave Ollie Robbins? You know, he's come into the job. He's 3 weeks in. It's the job of his life. You know, he's a career civil servant. He can hardly contain the excitement of being in post and getting stuck into the detail of doing this job. And he's told the first thing on his desk is, get this sorted out. We need him in Washington. The guy's done what he's been told to do. And now he's gone. His career's over. I'm sure he's going to earn a living. Don't get me wrong. I don't feel that sorry for him.
No.
But the truth is, that was the job he wanted and loved. And he's stayed with the civil service from being young, I suspect. And now he's got the situation where he's not in the job because, frankly, politicians and those around politicians have told him to do a thing that he's done, and now he's gone. It's unfair. And I think this isn't going away. And I think the reality is the Prime Minister is in big bother as a result.
Carl, thank you. Let's talk to Steve Baker, former Conservative Government Minister, of course. Morning to you, Steve. I mean, it's a mess. It's got mess written all over it. Ollie Robbins here is trying to separate the wheat from the chaff in this evidence that he's given and show some sort of clarity. Seems like a very polite man, quite a precise man. We have learnt so far, though, Steve, that Mandelson was given access early doors to some high classified briefing, despite not at that stage having any kind of clearance because they were in the middle of the process. And the pressure from Number 10, he said this a couple of times in different ways, was on. He needed to be in post, and Number 10 were driving that pressure. Morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, these processes are things that I'm well familiar with, having been a minister in 3 departments. I also know Ollie Robbins a little because we worked together in the Brexit department, and subsequently we struck up something of a friendship over various matters. So I do know him a little. He's the absolutely consummate civil servant. And what you're seeing on this select committee appearance is the way he is. Scrupulously honest, loyal to the state, and so on. And I am not surprised to discover what he said was that the pressure came from Number 10, from the private office. I will say what he couldn't. If pressure is coming from the private office of the Prime Minister, then it's what the Prime Minister has decided.
Correct.
Being a civil servant, he's trying to just avoid directly blaming the Prime Minister, which is very good of him to maintain that discipline. But it's obvious to anyone listening. The Prime Minister had this, I think he said, a dismissive attitude to vetting. The Prime Minister and his political staff had decided the man was Mandelson, and Ollie Robbins had been handed the imperative. And the other thing that I think is absolutely a bombshell here quietly is that Ollie said UK security vetting does not fail people. They make a recommendation. It's the Foreign Office that decides. The Prime Minister stood at the dispatch box and said it was shameful, etc., that he hadn't been told that Mandelson had been failed.
Yes.
So the Prime Minister will have willfully misled the House, or he was misbriefed. But, you know, this will go round again now. The Prime Minister ought to know that UKSV does not, in fact, pass-fail people, that it was for the Foreign Office to decide.
Of course.
So Starmer's entire case might be based on the lie that UKSV passes and fails people when actually it had to be decided by the Foreign Office. It's a right mess.
Indeed, it's a right mess. Stay with us, Steve. Let's go back to that committee and hear the latest. Ollie Robbins speaking with Emily Thornberry.
I don't think I made such a phone call, and if I did, it would have been simply to share the outcome of the process, which is that DV had been given.
Right, so you might have discussed it with someone else and got them to tell whoever it was that was pushing the Foreign Office as to what had happened.
It's possible, but Chair, honestly, I am trying to do my best to help you, but I think this is a bit of a red herring. Within hours, as the humble address pack makes clear, Peter Mandelson was written to with a contract of employment and a posting letter to Washington, which the Foreign Office had always said he would only get once he passed DV. So it was absolutely clear. Not only that, within minutes of us recording our decision to grant DV, Peter will have received a DV certificate, and it's entirely possible that Mandelson himself will have then told people it's been granted. I don't think I felt under any obligation to tell anybody.
I think you are under an obligation to keep accurate minutes and notes of decisions that you make, of actions that you take, and your reasoning. And I think that it's quite clear from the Civil Service Code that it is your responsibility to keep accurate official records and handle information as openly as possible within the legal framework, that you must not be influenced by improper pressure from others, that you must not ignore inconvenient facts or relevant considerations when providing advice or making decisions, and that in order to be able to cover yourself, don't mind anything else, given that's what the ministerial, the code says, that you would take a note in order to make it clear that you were not subject to undue pressure, that you were not ignoring inconvenient facts, that you were behaving properly. But it doesn't look like there has been any notes about any of this.
So can I make 2 points? I've been a civil servant for a quarter of a century. I could recite the code to you, and I believe it, along with probably the Book of Common Prayer, is one of the 2 things I kind of can hold in my memory, and I've abided by it. And you will find, when the records are finally opened, you will find record of the decision. It is clear. What I am saying to you is that whilst there was an atmosphere of pressure, the department rigorously followed the process, and we did so, frankly, as I understand it, despite some in government believing it was not a process we ever needed to follow. And I just ask you to reflect for a second. I don't think, my life might have been considerably easier over the last 2 or 3 days if I'd wanted to come to this committee and said I was put under such pressure I just agreed to it. But that wouldn't be true. I was given a set of serious reflections on the risks raised by a bunch of professionals who had come across these risks before and thought the Foreign Office could manage them well, and at least the way I was briefed, that was a position that was implicitly understood by UKSV. We then recorded that decision and we put in place the mitigations, and clearance was granted.
Because again, the code does say that if you believe that you're being required to act in a way that conflicts with this code, you should speak to your line manager. Which leads me to this. Your line manager would be Chris Wormold, presumably. But is it right that you say that you never told him? You never told him about any of the difficulties that you were facing, any of the pressure you were facing? In fact, you didn't even tell him that UKSV had said that Peter Mandelson was a person of high concern and that developed vetting be denied.
As I say, whilst I think the department felt under pressure, we were proud of the fact we'd not bowed to that pressure. Therefore, I didn't have a complaint to make to Chris because I was confident that we were handling it well. I should say on a lighter note, Chair, I think by the time clearance was granted, I'd not yet had my introductory meeting with the Cabinet Secretary, so these were very early days.
Yeah. And it wouldn't be part of your meeting with him to say, oh, well, we had a few wrinkles, but it doesn't matter, it was sorted out. Or UKSV were pushing in one direction, but the Foreign Office have, through putting conditions on Peter Mandelson, covered that. Or you wouldn't have been tempted to say that to Chris Wormold. You wouldn't have been tempted to say that to Morgan McSweeney. You wouldn't have been tempted to say that to anyone.
Absolutely not, Chair, because my understanding of custom, practice, and guidance is that the decision-making within the box of the vetting process must remain entirely confidential.
But if you've put it in any of the ways I've suggested, you would not have been disclosing any of the content of that DV. You would just have been disclosing the fact that it had been passed, but that there had been difficulties. And surely that does not disclose anything of substance. That's all process.
But I think it would have been, Chair, I think it would have been me just trying to shift responsibility onto others. It's absolutely clear the permanent Undersecretary is responsible for the security of the department. You know well from the work of this committee, the Foreign Office is the most attacked government department, as attacked as the rest of government put together. That was a heavy responsibility for my tenure as permanent Undersecretary. If I started sharing that burden with others and saying, this was a bit of a tricky one, but I think we can manage. What I'm doing is I'm offloading that responsibility. The responsibility ultimately was on me, and I carried it out rigorously and to the best of my ability.
If you widened the circle, or if you made notes, or if there had been more paperwork, then wouldn't those have been disclosable under the Freedom of Information Act? And isn't the only reason that we even know that the UKSV had said that developed vetting should be denied is because of the humble address? Otherwise, we would never have known, and there would never have been any paperwork, and there would never have been an audit trail, and there would never have been a trail of decision-making. We would never have known.
I think if you're saying to me, excuse me, Chair, I think I'm following you, but that vetting documents are outside the Freedom of Information Act. That's absolutely true. And I think it's an incredibly important tenet of how the system works.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying
you
otherwise.
cannot have a system in which the hundreds, if not thousands, of candidates for vetting think that at some point in the process, a line manager's line manager who they've never met might choose to see their boss and say, this was a bit of a tricky one. The UKSV documentation sort of erred against, but don't worry, I managed
we have
through.
your complete
I think that would be a
support on
breach
this.
of trust.
Let's not. We support you completely on this.
Thank you.
That's not a problem. The problem is the process. The problem is that if there had been more paperwork, if you had discussed it with anyone, then it might have come out that there had at least been, to put it as mildly as possible, a wrinkle.
Excuse me, Chair. You're a lawyer and I'm not. But my understanding of the Freedom of Information Act is it's about the exemptions, if they're available, are about the nature of the material, not about the type of communication. So I think if I had gone to somebody else, talked about a vetting issue, and that had been recorded, it would have been covered by the same exemptions. My point is, I should never have done it, and I didn't.
Okay.
So this is the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Steve Baker, former government minister in many departments, has been listening to that. I mean, there's a lot of kind of, Steve, a lot of kind of internal apparatus to all of this. Who says what to who, how that particular system works, who you're meant to pass it up to or down to, what you can say, what you can't say, what is written, what is verbal, etc. There's a lot of that going on in this.
Look, let's cut right down to the simple fact that the reason Mandelson is not today the ambassador is his links to Epstein. That was known about when Keir Starmer insisted on his appointment, and it was part of the problem that was handed to the Foreign Office. One of the other big things that's emerged here is Ollie said clearly that there was a difference of opinion amongst officials, excuse me, about whether they needed to do this process at all, a point I've been making on X for a long time. Mandelson was a political appointee. When political appointees are made ministers, they are not DV cleared. That is because there isn't time, because you have to take up your duties instantly, but also much more relevantly, you can't have officials blocking political appointments in a democracy. So really, in my view, the big mistake officials made here was to insist that Mandelson go through the standard process. They should have relied on him being a former Secretary of State, being a Privy Councillor, and in the end, ultimately, for all their misgivings, it being the Prime Minister's responsibility, because in the end, the real problem here is not whether Mandelson had some business interests in Russia and China, which were appropriately mitigated through procedures that Ollie Robbins put in place. That's what he's not saying, but that I'm quite confident will have been what this is about. The real issue is that he had a close connection to a convicted paedophile, and that should have blown his appointment out of the water at the start. The Prime Minister's said it's a mistake and apologised for it. Really, this all just leads back two things: to Starmer taking a daft decision, and second, to officials actually trying to do their job by insisting on DV. They should have said, this is political, we don't do politics, we do official processes. You must decide, Prime Minister, here are our misgivings. And if they'd put all their misgivings in writing to the Prime Minister, including misgivings from MI5 and MI6, and not put him through the process, Ollie Robbins wouldn't be sitting here today sacked. But because officials tried to do the right thing, this has happened.
Steve, thank you for your time. Always good to get your take. Steve Baker, former Conservative government minister, thank you to him. That committee hearing is still going on. We will dip into and continue to take any salient points that come from that. I just want to look at a different story here. Mentioned this, touched on this briefly in reference to it yesterday. Dale Vince, the green entrepreneur, the founder of Ecotricity, big Labour donor, big supporter of the Labour Party, is urging Ed Miliband to ditch heat pumps. Now, heat pumps, of course, are all part and parcel of Ed's, if you like, his eco-vision. Windmills, panels, heat pumps is a kind of part of the trio of joy to save the planet. Let's speak with Dale Vince, founder of Ecotricity. Morning to you, Dale.
Yeah, morning, Ian. How's things?
It's all good. Nice to see you. Look, I mean, the other part of the story, which I haven't revealed yet, I did say it earlier on in the show, by the way, is that you're suggesting that the money saved from heat pumps could go to buy bombs for the MOD. What has happened to the left-winger Dale Vince? Now you're talking about drill, baby, drill. What's happening?
No, I'm not talking about drill, baby, drill. Really, it's because in the news last week, we learned that the MOD are cash-strapped. I think we'd just given a few £1 billion to Ukraine, and then it was announced we were short of a few £1 billion for some vital defence spending.
Yeah.
And so I really just I put this in a mildly provocative way, keep your boilers and buy some bombs. But there's a genuine point behind it, which is that DESNZ have a near £3 billion fund to buy heat pumps or to subsidise heat pumps. They're really middle-class subsidies, and middle-class might be the wrong term, a bit like, a bit politically charged, but it's for people that have money that can afford to spend maybe another 10 grand on top of the subsidy to buy this exotic technology that won't bring their bills down. And at the same time, 5 million people in our country can't afford to pay their energy bills. And of course, this crisis is driving them up. And I'm just saying, look, there is a pot of money if we need it for defence, and it's in the heat pump department.
Yeah. Do you think there's any chance? I mean, lots of people have made this point. You and I have spoken about it many, many times. I know you've never been a fan of heat pumps. You don't see them as being, as you say, they don't bring energy bills down. They also aren't the most efficient form of energy either. And there's lots of discussion points around that. I'm hearing more and more people say this. The only person that doesn't seem to agree with it is Ed Miliband.
Yeah, there's a couple of other notable ones, like a particularly prominent government advisor, but I won't name him. Look, it really, it's almost like some kind of mass delusion that's taken hold of the country. Certainly, it's not just politicians. A lot of people out there have been misled to think that heat pumps will bring their bills down. We conducted a survey, or we commissioned one, of heat pump users, and it showed that 2/3 of people say their bills have gone up, and only 15% say their bills have gone down. And it really kind of represents the fact, Ian, that unless you have ideal conditions, then a heat pump will put your bill up.
Yeah. While you're with us, Dale, as a Labour supporter, as a Labour donor, what are you making of what is happening? Keir Starmer looks as if he's at the last chance saloon at the moment. Is he going to walk that plank in the next couple of weeks?
Me, personally, I don't think he's the plank walk-in type. I suffered. I sat waiting to come on your show, watching maybe 10 minutes of that committee. Honestly, it's like watching paint dry. Yeah. It seemed to be a lot of quibbling over a lot of detail. And look, Mandelson shouldn't have been appointed. I think lots of people would agree with that. I'm bored of the topic already, Ian.
True. I mean, he might not be the plank walking type, but he might be the type that is made to walk the plank.
Yeah, he might be, but I can't see it. Honestly, I can't.
You really think he's going to be there till 2029?
Well, it'll be there. May elections just around the corner, aren't they? I can't see it leaving before that. If that's a disaster, maybe the conversation comes up again. But, he's got a massive mandate for the country. I just think he needs to get bold. Today, we saw an announcement on breaking the link, which is a sham. Government are not breaking the link. I'm very disappointed with that. Something real has to be done, because we're in the second energy crisis of this decade. Bills are about to go up again. We've got something like 6 million of consumer debt already in the energy sector, and 5 million people living in energy poverty. Something real has to be done.
So you think he's going to survive? The Prime Minister can survive this, Dale?
If I read the tea leaves, I've got a cup of tea here, actually. Yeah, he's hanging on for a bit.
He's hanging on, according to... Is that a teabag tea leaf or a proper tea leaf?
It is teabag tea, but it does leave leaves. Look,
true, yes. They're pretty porous tea bags over there at Ecotricity. Dale, great to have you with us. Thank you, Dale Vince, founder of Ecotricity. Ditch the heat pump and put that money into defences, where we are well short, says Dale. We're going to go back to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. John Whittingdale, the Conservative MP, asking a question now to Ollie Robbins. He, of course, is the now sacked former permanent secretary of the Foreign Office. Let's have a dip in to see what's being said.
To go against the recommendation of UKSV, or was it simply reported, we've had a meeting and we've decided that he should obtain clearance?
I'm sure the director, and sorry, I did answer the chair earlier. I don't think it was just the director in the meeting with me. I think there was at least one member of his team there. I'm sure they will have debriefed to some extent on the conversation, but I don't know precisely what was said.
Did you tell ministers at all, or number 10? You told them the outcome of your decision, the outcome of the meeting, but did you tell them about the recommendation made by UKSD?
No, and months later, when in the immediate aftermath of Mandelson's sacking, we were obviously thinking internally about how to respond to legitimate questions this committee and others had about that process. And my recollection is, in a way, I wasn't surprised by the direction from number 10 was, we must make clear that these decisions were taken entirely independently of ministers and that they were not consulted other than to be told the outcome.
Edward, I think you wanted to intervene.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify the conversation that happened in the meeting discussing, presumably your Chief of Security comes to you and explains the concerns raised, but also the mitigation that he believes the department can put in place. At that point, is it a recommendation to you, or is it your judgment on whether or not those mitigations are sufficient for you to be satisfied on the granting of DV?
Good question.
I recall it as a recommendation to me, but before you read too much into that, I was accountable.
I accept that.
So that is not an attempt to say, oh, you know, if only they are entirely professional people. They care deeply about national security. They run one of the toughest security functions in government, given the attack we're under. I trusted their judgment and I backed it.
Okay, I totally accept that, but I just want to be clear that the advice you were given in that meeting, that conversation, was that we understand these risks, we believe we can mitigate against them, and therefore you should be comfortable making the decision to grant it, or it's our decision that it can be granted given these mitigations are in place.
Obviously we're at a stage in this whole episode where precise words are very important, and I wish I could recall them that precisely, Mr. Morello, but I don't think that's an unfair representation.
Okay, so you've already outlined the extreme levels of political pressure that you were under to complete this process. Is there any suggestion that that pressure filtered down to the department that ultimately was making the recommendations to you? Were you satisfied in that meeting that the evidence the options that were proposed to you and the decisions that they were proposing was come to independently of the political pressure that was being exerted on you, or will they also have felt the political pressure that was on the department?
So, extremely good question, and I am very confident in answering. They are clever people, they will have been very aware of the pressure. I also have complete confidence that their recommendations to me and the discussion we had and the decision we made was rigorously independent of that pressure.
Thank you, Chair. What I want to ask, having heard everything you've given us so far, is what do you think would have happened if you denied clearance? Yeah. How would you have gone about that? Yeah. What would the impact of that be? Would it even be possible?
So maybe this is the first time, remembering back to the Chair's introduction, where I can abandon the civil servant's response of saying that's a hypothetical question. I think it would have been very difficult indeed, Mr. Carden. I mean, again, if I can walk you back to the situation I came into the post in, we had been through all of these steps very publicly, in which the Prime Minister's nominee had been put out there to the public, announced, blessed by the King, agreed by the US government. We were in receipt of formal letters from Number 10 telling us to get on with it quickly. We had engineered agreement to arrive just before the inauguration, as required by that original letter that's been published as part of the humble address response. So I'm not trying to hide from your question, but I suppose all I can do is agree with the premise that against that backdrop, the Foreign Office saying, okay, but sorry, we can't grant him clearance, would have been a very, very difficult problem. And a difficult problem I would have been landing the Foreign Secretary with and the Prime Minister with. And of course, given the commentary of the last few days, I'm acutely conscious of that, and I've done the odd bit of what-if-ery myself. But I suppose, just in case this is the thrust of your question, that was not what was on my mind as we took this decision. I have spent 25 years now, just as a civil servant. About half of that period, I've been in jobs that have an acute bearing on national security. I live and breathe this stuff, possibly to a fault, Mr. Carden, and I believe passionately that it's one of the jobs of the civil service, creatively, flexibly, to support ministers in protecting national security. That's what I wanted the team performing this assessment to feel. And that's the conversation that was going on in my head as I listened to their recommendations.
And so if we go back again, the Cabinet Secretary at the time, Lord Case, advised the Prime Minister to carry out security vetting prior to announcing any appointment. Why would that advice not have been followed?
Here I will take the civil servant's answer, if I may. It's a hypothetical I can't possibly have a bearing on. I
wonder why it wouldn't have happened automatically. If that was the view of the civil service, why wouldn't that advice just automatically be followed, that vetting would be gained before an announcement made?
I can only guess. The Prime Minister had received a due diligence report in which the very well-known reputational risks of appointing Mandelson were presumably made clear to him. He had advice on different options for the post. I assume he will have looked at the risks around Mandelson, and maybe he thought, look, this is a very well-known character. I'm making a risk judgment that his political skills and nous in Washington is just what this country needs at this time. And he decided there's not much more that any process can tell me ahead of me making this announcement and making this appointment. Now, as I've said earlier in response to questions, I hope that if I'd been in the system at the time those decisions were being made, first I hope that Number 10 or the Cabinet Office might have wanted to consult me. I don't think at the time the Foreign Office was consulted. And then I hope my advice would have been, that's adding unnecessarily to your risk, Prime Minister.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that Foreign Office officials granted him, Peter Mandelson, developed vetting clearance against the specific recommendation of the United Kingdom security vetting that developed vetting clearance should be denied. And then you've said to us that UKSV did not fail Mandelson and FCDO did not overrule their decision. I'm trying to get to is it your contention that the Prime Minister is misunderstanding the process which you followed?
I can only describe the process as I understand it, and I hope, having been Deputy National Security Advisor for 4 years, responsible for vetting and for the strap clearance process that often follows it, and then having spent a year and a bit as Permanent Under-Secretary, my understanding of it is reasonably good. But also, you don't have to believe me. I mean, there are guidance documents available in the Foreign Office that describe this precisely to candidates for vetting. UKSV is a service provider, and the Foreign Office takes the decision based on its own risk assessment and whether it thinks that the risks can be managed. That's precisely what we did in this case. The outcome is the Foreign Office decision. That's a professional decision on security advice. It's not the quixotic decision of some permanent secretary who thinks he's under pressure. But in this case, the team thought it wise and prudent to take me through their reasoning.
Final question. Is the Prime Minister right to have expected you to provide him with more information on the vetting process?
I hope it's clear from everything I've said so far that I believe that's a misunderstanding and a dangerous misunderstanding of the necessity of confidentiality of the process. And I think, I've been interested, of course, over the last couple of days to read Lord Hague on this today, and David Lammy even on Saturday, the former Foreign Secretary, Deputy Prime Minister, where both have said in different language that they have never had vetting issues discussed with them in all their time as a minister, and nor would they expect to. And I'm afraid that's exactly the culture I have been brought up in. It's supported by guidance. You are not supposed to share the findings and reports of UKSV other than in the exceptional circumstances where doing so allows for the specific mitigation of risk.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to Edward quickly and then to Richard.
Thank you, Chair. So, Oliver, you've made clear the exceptional circumstances surrounding the appointment of Sir Peter and the amount of stuff that had happened before the security vetting process had been completed, and that it was highly unusual and not the best practice for the way that the Foreign Office likes to run things. Were there other political appointees? Did Number 10 Operation propose any other political appointees during your tenure as Permanent Secretary? And did they abide by the standard practice during that process, in that no appointment could be made until the process had been completed? And as a result of that, were you more comfortable in not appointing those people?
I think in my tenure as Permanent Under-Secretary, there was only ever one other serious proposal made, and I think that was in March 2025.
What role?
Sorry?
What role?
There were several discussions initiated by Number 10 with me about potentially finding a head of mission opportunity for Matthew Doyle, who was then the Prime Minister's Director of Communications. And I was under strict instruction not to discuss that with the then Foreign Secretary, which was uncomfortable. But the context here, Mr. Morello, was, I was still in my early months in the job, but I'd already concluded, as indeed I think I gave evidence to this committee about not long afterwards, that the Foreign Office needed quite serious reform. I was in the process of talking to the top team about quite a profound restructuring involving job losses. And I found it very hard to think how I would explain to the office what the credentials of Matthew were to be in an important head of mission role when